Husband took nuclear revenge after discovering his cheating wife had a secret child. Temporary duty assignments TDY can sometimes be fun and exciting, but this one was not. It was 30 days of almost round-the-clock hard work. Every year, the U.S. Army participates in a rapid deployment exercise. Several units from across the Army are selected to participate and are airlifted, along with all their equipment, to Germany, where they engage in a month-long exercise with their NATO counterparts. My name is Fred Sadler. At the time, I was a relatively new captain in the U.S. Army, working in the Operations Division stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. This deployment came at the worst possible time for me to be anywhere other than home with my wife, who was pregnant and due to deliver sometime during the deployment. Lydia and I had been married for almost 6 years when the deployment began. My commanding officer said, "I give you a personal guarantee that I will do everything in my power to get you home before the baby is born." And he did. At the end of the exercise, I packed my things and was about to get on a plane. I called Lydia, who told me she thought she was going to be hospitalized in the next couple of days. "Then the timing must be perfect because I'm on my way home," I told her. It was dusk. I was driving to the airport when a deer ran out into the road. My driver swerved to avoid it, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a military hospital in Frankfurt. My right arm, right leg, and 3 ribs on my side were broken, and my right lung had collapsed. "How long have I been here?" I asked my nurse. 5 days. "Is my wife here?" "No, sir," I called Lydia. "Are you okay?" were her first words. "Don't mind me." "How are you and the baby?" She began to cry. "We lost the baby, Fred. I'm so sorry." "Are you okay?" I asked. "Physically, I'm fine, but emotionally, I'm a mess." 2 weeks later, I was flown home on a medevac airplane. Lydia met me and traveled with me to the Fort Hood Hospital. She was still an emotional wreck, but our time together seemed to help us both. I was in the hospital for another 2 weeks before I was discharged on limited duty. 2 years after we lost our child, we were transferred to Heidelberg, Germany. We spent 3 years there traveling all over Europe. There, I was promoted to major. After 3 years, we were transferred to Fort Lewis, Washington. Being a major, we were given field-grade officers' quarters. They were much nicer than company grade and had garages, not just carports. When we moved into the cabin at Lewis, all the things we took with us to Germany were sent back. We unpacked those boxes as well as the boxes we had stored and did not take with us. Using a box cutter, I opened one of the many boxes and began to take things out of it. It was the box we had stored things in while we were in Germany. About halfway down was a small wooden box that I didn't remember seeing before. I placed it on top of the stack of boxes and opened it. My life changed forever. There was a small stack of envelopes with a pink ribbon around them. I pulled the ribbon away and picked up the top envelope. It was unsealed and I opened it. Inside was an official document labeled birth certificate. As I looked at the document, my mind began to fog up. It stated that a baby girl, weighing 7 lbs 6 ounces and 19 inches long, was born alive. It included the date. It was the same date Lydia had told me our baby was not alive when born. The baby was named Hope. It went on to say that the mother's name was Lydia Jane Sadler, née Johnston. Where the father's name was listed, there was a note that said, "Unknown." I picked up the next envelope. It, too, was unsealed. I pulled out a multi-page document. It was an adoption certificate. I read it several times. The gist of it was that a child named Hope, born to Lydia Sadler, had been given up for adoption, and all parental rights had been stripped. It went on to say that since the identity of the biological father was unknown, his permission was not required. How many men had she slept with in that time? Did she know? She had to know that even in marriage, we need personal space and thoughts. I drove up to the golf course, parked the car, and headed to the 19th hole, where there was a bar, diner, and restaurant. I ordered 2 eggs over medium heat and corned beef hash. This used to be my favorite breakfast until Lydia changed my eating habits. I managed to eat most of it and sat on the deck while the golfers finished the 18th hole and went inside. When I got home, it was the middle of the day. She had made a lot of progress in taking down boxes and organizing the house. I went to my unit and into the office. There was no one there except the officer on duty. I sat down at my desk and tried to work, but my heart was not in it. When I got home, it was past midnight. She was lying in bed reading. I undressed and took a shower. "I'll sleep downstairs," I announced as I walked out and closed the door. I had just turned on the TV and was getting comfortable on the couch when she walked in, grabbed the remote, turned off the TV, and stared at me. "Cut the crap. Tell me what's wrong and I'll either help you or leave. Which is it? I haven't done anything wrong. So I won't tolerate you yelling at me when I'm trying to help or having to get out of your way when you try to run me down." I walked over to her, took the remote from her hands, and turned the TV back on. "Have a safe trip," I said. She left less than an hour later. On Monday morning, I talked to my commander and told him my story. I even showed him the documents. He was as dumbfounded as I was. "What do you plan to do?" he asked me. "I'm not sure." "Did she say where she was going when she left?" "No, sir, but she didn't take all her things, especially the box." There was a pause before I spoke again. I was thinking of trying to find my daughter, if she is my daughter, and proceed from there. It would be virtually impossible. In adoption cases, confidentiality is very important to both parties, he said. "I understand, but I have to do something. I have to start somewhere, and I don't trust her to tell me the truth anymore." Then I literally jumped up. "Oh my God, I have an idea. Can I have the day off?" "Sure." I saluted and ran out of his office and building, into the parking lot where I jumped in my car and drove home. I opened the box, pulled out the wooden box, and dumped the contents on the floor. There was a pacifier in there. A pacifier. Hope must have used it before she was taken. I put the box back together, put the pacifier in a clear plastic bag, and sealed it. I got on the internet, trying to find a DNA lab in the area. There was one in downtown Seattle. I went into the bathroom, but all of Lydia's things were gone. I rummaged through the cabinet under the sink, found her old hairbrush, put it in another plastic bag along with the bag that held the pacifier, and hauled back to Seattle. "We'll call you in about 3 weeks, she said. I didn't hear from Lydia for another whole day. "Hi," I said. "Are you feeling better?" "Better than what?" "Better than the idiot you were a couple of days ago." "No, same old idiot." "Why?" 3 weeks exactly. By then I should know if I'm going to eliminate you or just divorce you." I ended the conversation. The phone immediately rang and I ignored it. The next day when I got home, Lydia was already there. She met my car as I pulled up to the house. She was furious. "What do you mean you're going to either liquidate me or divorce me?" Exactly what I said. "I think I deserve an explanation," she said. "Me too." "About what?" she asked. We were still in the driveway. "You mean you don't need to explain anything?" I asked. "That's exactly what I'm talking about." "So there's no hope for us?" I said, putting as much emphasis as possible on the word hope. "What do you mean there is no hope for us? What have I done?" Then it hit her. "Oh my God, no, please no. I'll be back in an hour and you better not be here. I'll leave for work in the morning at 6:30. I'll be back at 5. By then, all your stuff should be out of this house." I left. I came back exactly an hour later and she was gone. And so was the box and some of her things. When I got home in the evening, the house was almost empty. She had picked out almost all the furniture and taken it away. True, she left my favorite chair and a bedroom set for guests. The next morning, I called my office to let them know I would be late. I then called Post Housing and arranged for government furniture to be temporarily brought to my apartment. I also called the credit union, our stockbroker, the insurance company, and anyone else I could think of and went about those mundane housekeeping things that are usually associated with divorce. I then made an appointment with a JAG Judge Advocate General Army lawyer. I knew they were not authorized to represent me in civilian court, but they could advise me. They confirmed what I suspected: she would get half. We lived in public housing, so we didn't own a house, but we had enough equity to buy one if we wanted to. Both our cars were paid off. My life continued for a couple more weeks. I went to work, did my chores, mowed the lawn, and washed and cleaned my car. One morning, the phone rang. "Hello," I answered. "Is that Major Fred Sadler?" "It is Major Sadler. This is Margie from the DNA Analysis Center. A few weeks ago, you gave us some samples to test." "Yes, I did." "Well, the results are in and you can come in and look at them." "Can't you just tell me now?" "No, sir, I can't. We can either mail them to the address you gave us or show them to you in person. We have no way to verify over the phone that you are who you say you are. We have to see identification. We can mail the results because, as you may recall, we asked you for ID when you were here and we were able to verify your address. I'll be there as soon as I can." I walked through their door, introduced myself, and asked for Margie. She came out and we shook hands. She asked to see my identification. "Come with me, please," she said. I followed her into a small room. She asked me to wait. She left and came back a couple of minutes later. She handed me the pacifier and then spoke. "Sample A is yours, Sample B is from the hair you gave us, and Sample C is from the pacifier." We were able to determine that samples B and C are positively related. Sample A is not related to either B or C. "Thanks," I said, took the pacifier, put it in my pocket, took the papers, and left. I got into my car. At least I didn't have a daughter calling some other man daddy, but someone else did. JAG was not authorized to recommend specific law firms or attorneys, but the JAG officer I spoke with was able to provide me with a list of approved attorneys and firms. The next day I started calling them. I made 6 appointments. At the 3rd appointment I found my man. He was a retired JAG officer and hated cheating spouses, both wife and husband. I spent over an hour telling him my story. When I got home, it was late. There was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lydia. Fred, 3 weeks are up. Lydia. Short and to the point. The return address was her parents' address in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I called her. "Hi, Fred," she said. "I won't talk about it over the phone, and I'm certainly not flying to Pennsylvania, so I guess you'll have to come here. If you mean Seattle, I'm already here. I sent a letter last week when I was there. I'll be at the house at 6:30. Come over then," I told her. She hung up. I didn't make any special arrangements. No drinks, no cheese, no crackers, nothing. This was supposed to be a business meeting. I put the DNA documents and my copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers on the government-issued coffee table. She pulled up to the driveway at 6:20 but waited until exactly 6:30 to ring the bell. I was in no hurry to answer it. Opening the door, I invited her in and indicated where she should sit. I sat on the couch. She sat in the uncomfortable straight-back chair across from me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pacifier and held it out to her. She grabbed it and held it to her bosom. "Thank you," she said, as if I'd given her $1 million. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA test results. "You already know I'm not the father, but this will confirm it." She reached for the results and took them with her left hand. The pacifier remained clutched in her right. "I take it you are sample A?" she asked. "Yes." Then I pushed the rest of the papers toward her without saying anything. She leaned forward, read the title on the top sheet, and tears welled up in her eyes. She set the DNA test results aside and picked up the dissolution of marriage application. She started to read it, but the tears were already flowing freely and falling onto the form, so she set it aside. "Can I have a tissue?" she asked. "I don't have any." "You're not making it easy for me, are you?" she asked. "You cheated," I said. She nodded. "How many times?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I just want to know." "One weekend, different men." "Just one." "Who is he?" "Does it really matter?" "Again, I just want to know. I think I deserve it." "I'm not going to tell you." "Do I know him?" "I'm not going to tell you." "So you'd rather protect him than try to save your marriage?" She picked up the divorce petition. "Our marriage is over anyway, why ruin it?" "Okay, but you have to tell me why you lied about your daughter being not alive when born." "When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure if it was your baby or his. I thought about getting an abortion, but I couldn't. Over time, I was able to reason that you can't know for sure if it's your baby or not. When we found out it was going to be a girl, I was even more sure you wouldn't know because there is a special bond between dad and daughter, and I was sure you and her would look alike. As the time of her birth approached, I started to get nervous. Maybe you would find out she wasn't yours. Then you went away on a business trip, and my nerves calmed down a bit. I was glad you wouldn't be around when she was born. Then you told me you were flying home, and I started to get nervous again. My emotions had been on a roller coaster. Maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be there when she's born, maybe you won't. I was nervous. Then she was there, alive and perfect. She was placed on my chest, and I looked at her and fell in love. She was beautiful. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She paused. "Just like her father's. You have brown hair and brown eyes. No one in our families has blonde hair and blue eyes. I knew she wasn't yours. She was my daughter, and you were my husband. I loved you both, but I knew I had to choose between you. I chose you. The hospital staff helped me when I told them I wanted to give her up for adoption. Within 24 hours, I had the papers in my hands. They asked who the baby's father was, and I said I didn't know. They said it would be easier that way because if I knew who the father was, they would have to get his permission. I just held her in my arms. She was sucking on a pacifier when they brought me the papers to sign. I knew I had to tell you something, so I made up the lie that she was not alive when born and her remains were cremated. When you came home, I couldn't believe you didn't ask to see the birth certificate, certificate of death, or anything else. I still can't believe it. I trusted you, I said. I had no reason not to trust you. Besides, it was so traumatic that I saw no reason to add to our suffering by looking at those pieces of paper. Eventually, you and I got our lives back to normal, and I was almost happy. But a part of me was missing. It still is, and it gets worse every year on her birthday. I always took the time to pull out her birth certificate, touch her little footprints, and hold her pacifier. There were times when I wanted to put it in my mouth to feel closer to her, but it had some of my dried breast milk on it, and I wanted to preserve it, so I didn't. They must have scraped it off at the DNA lab. Oh my God, it's gone. She groaned, then looked at me. It's gone. Her milk is gone. You idiot, you took her milk. She fell to her knees and literally curled up in a ball on the floor. I picked her up and put her on the couch. I couldn't let her leave in that condition, so I covered her with a blanket and went to my bedroom, but not to bed. She remained there for several hours. At midnight, I heard the toilet flush. I went downstairs. She was sitting on the couch. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. "Yes, please." She sat down at the counter while I brewed her a cup. She took a sip. "I guess I got a little cold feet, huh?" "Sort of." We sat in silence and drank coffee. "More?" I asked. "Yes, please," she replied. "Where are you staying?" I asked, brewing 2 more cups. "At the motel." "You were there for more than 3 weeks?" "No, I was with my parents most of the time." "Do they know the truth?" "No, I lied to them too. I told them that you and I were going through a difficult time and I needed to get away from you for a while. They paid for me to visit them. They think I came back to help sort out our difficulties." She looked around, walked over to the coffee table, pulled a pen out of her purse, sat down, signed the divorce papers without reading them, and left. When I woke up, it was the middle of Sunday morning. I spent the rest of the day thinking. I took the divorce papers to my attorney on Monday, and he filed them. I've been thinking a lot about who Lydia cheated with. She never told me who he was or how the affair started. It wasn't just that she cheated and got pregnant that made me angry, it was that she defended the idiot and wouldn't tell me who he was. The only thing she told me was that it only lasted 1 weekend. Fortunately, I was so busy at work that I didn't have time to think about anything else. 2 weeks later, I was back at Fort Hood, where Lydia and I were living when her daughter was born. Usually, military seminars are pretty intense, but this one was relaxed. We were divided into groups of 3 to work on a project. It turned out that there were 6 groups of 3, and there were 2 left, a major from Alaska and myself. We developed a close friendship almost immediately. It seemed like we'd known each other all our lives. His name was Keith Franklin, and as I said, he was stationed in Alaska at Fort Wainwright, the coldest base in the U.S. Army. But he loved it there. He was a computer genius, and we were so far ahead of everyone else that we had to slow down and wait for them to catch up. On Friday of the first week, we had lunch at the officers' club. He told me about his personal life. He cheated on his wife, and she divorced him. She is now living with some civilian, and his 2 children call the other man Daddy. Toward the end of lunch, I laid out my story too. When I finished, he had a strange look in his eyes. "And you don't know who the man she had an affair with is?" "No, she didn't tell me." "And that was here in Hood?" "Yes, 5 years ago. It's almost 6. Blonde hair and blue eyes, that's what she said. Come with me." We went to the Manpower Center. Everyone assigned to Fort Hood had to go through it. We walked right into the HR director's office. She saw us, stood up, and went around her desk to give Keith a hug. She looked to be about 60 years old and had a sparkle in her eyes. I liked her, and I hadn't even talked to her yet. "Aunt Lucy, this is Fred Sadler." "Hi, Fred," she said, shaking my hand. "Hello, Mrs. Healy." The nameplate on her desk read Mrs. Healy. I began, "Call me Aunt Lucy, everyone does." "Aunt Lucy," began Keith, "do you remember the fair-haired, blue-eyed officer who may have been here about 6 years ago?" She thought for a few seconds. "No, but I don't always see everyone who passes through here. They all have to, but that doesn't mean I see them." She thought some more. "Fred Sadler, you were here around that time, weren't you?" "I remember that name." "Yes, my wife and I were here," I said. I looked at Keith, as if asking how she remembered that. Keith looked at me. "Aunt Lucy has Sam, and she can remember just about anything she's read, seen, or been involved with. That includes people. She can remember everyone she's ever met." "Sam?" I asked. "Yes, superior autobiographical memory. It's a state of being, or a curse," Aunt Lucy interrupted. "Or a curse," Keith continued. "Very few people have it. Aunt Lucy is Fort Hood's institutional memory, especially when it comes to personnel matters. Isn't that right, Aunt Lucy?" "Unfortunately." I looked at her, then at Keith, then back at her. "You remember everything?" "Everything that happens to me personally." "Jesus," I said. "How do you have room for all this?" "We don't know, it's just always there." "Does it have any downsides?" I asked. "Oh God, yes. I remember the good as well as the bad. It can cause depression if you allow yourself to do that." "I can only imagine," I told her. "Aunt Lucy," Keith interrupted again. "Fred," he pointed at me. "He's looking for someone who was here at the same time. The only thing he knows about him is that he was blonde with blue eyes." She laughed. "That's it? No height, no weight, no rank, no assignment, not even his initials?" "No, ma'am," I said. "Calling me ma'am is a waste of good oxygen, Fred. I'm Aunt Lucy. Give me time to think and maybe ask around." "Does it matter?" Keith looked at me and I answered, "Yes, Aunt Lucy, it's important." "Oh, he was about the same age as me when I was here, if that helps, and he was in the Army." "Officer or private?" "I suppose he was an officer." "So you don't even know if he was in the service?" No, I don't. Or a civil servant. No, I'm sorry, I know it's not much to go on, she laughed. Yeah, there's just nothing to target there. Can't be more than 2,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed men I've encountered in the last few years, but I'll see if I can narrow down the time frame. She took both of our phone numbers. 2 days later, she called Keith. I've been thinking about the man you asked about. I don't remember any blonde-haired, blue-eyed soldiers, either officers or privates, who were about the right age, but I know 2 civilians who work for the Office of Post Engineers. One has worked there for about 30 years, so he's probably too old. The other has been working there for about 10 years. He's in charge of new construction now, but he used to be the head of the plumbing department. His name is Kurt Weber. There are about 15 other blue-eyed blondes on post, but the ages don't fit, and I didn't bother trying to remember civilians living off base because I assumed that when Major Sadler was here, he didn't have time to make many civilian friends. Keith told me, and I immediately started planning how to meet Weber, find out if he was the right man, and maybe get a little revenge. The men who prey on the wives of our military personnel are the second lowest form of life on the planet. The lowest, of course, are those who prey on wives when the serviceman is overseas. These idiots deserve the worst fate imaginable. The next morning, I was sitting on the next street over from Weber's house in my rental car. I was hoping he was golfing or doing some home projects, so maybe he was on his way to the local hardware or lumber store. I'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours when I saw his car pull out of the garage and speed down the street. Thank God, I thought. I didn't feel like sitting here all day to see if he'd gone somewhere, but I was willing to do it if I had to. I followed him to Home Depot. We parked, and I followed him into the store. He was obviously known there because he talked to a few of the employees. There was a spot right in front of the door where there was a coffee bar. I knew enough about Home Depot to know that their regular contractor customers could treat themselves. Weber helped himself and stood sipping his drink while he chatted with one of the salesmen behind the counter. Watching Mr. Weber, I realized one thing. Not only did he have sex with my wife and make her pregnant, but he chewed gum with his mouth open. Other than spitting on the sidewalk, I couldn't think of anything more disgusting. The clerk Weber was chatting with had to go help a customer, so Weber took one last sip of coffee, spit the gum into a paper cup, and walked away, unwrapping another piece of gum. I walked over to the trash can, looked in it, and saw, right on top, a paper coffee cup with a piece of gum in it. I looked around, didn't see anyone, and took the cup. I got in the car and called Keith. I told him what I had. He laughed and told me to hurry back, that he might have something bigger by the time I got there. When I arrived, he was literally jumping from place to place and waving some papers around. You're not going to believe this, he said. You won't really believe it. He grabbed my arm. Look at this. No, you better sit down. I did. He sat down next to me and put the papers in front of me. Now look, there were a few names and an address. So I asked, so what? That's Hope's name, address, and her family's name. Her name is Sarah now, Sarah Randolph. I hacked into the files of an adoption agency. Those files are encrypted better than the nuclear missile launch codes carried by the President of the United States. He then stopped and calmed down. Well, I didn't personally hack their files, my brother did, but it's the same thing. I started to laugh. That's great, Keith. But what exactly am I going to do with it? I have no idea, but you have them. Maybe we can blackmail someone. Oh, that's great. I can already see the headlines. 2 Army officers tried to blackmail a 6-year-old foster child. That's a great one. He tossed the papers on the coffee table and leaned back in his chair. Yes, I see where you're going with this. He got a little flustered again. But we cracked their defenses. That's something. Yeah, that's something, I said, laughing. I carried the papers and coffee cup back to my block and placed them on the desk. I have no idea why I did it, but I looked up the address where Hope lived and drove there early Sunday morning. It was almost 200 miles to Corsicana. The house was a typical suburban house. I sat outside for about an hour, observing American suburbia on a typical Sunday. The noise of a few lawnmowers, the screams of children, and the chatter of neighbors. No activity came from Hope's house until almost noon. A car pulled up to the driveway. There were 3 people in the car. A man was driving, a woman was in the front passenger seat, and a child was in the right rear seat. The woman got out of the car, closed her door, and reached for the right rear door. I was at the ready with my cell phone. The woman removed the child from the car seat, placed the child on the ground, then knelt down to straighten the baby's dress. I had just enough time to take a few pictures. I heard a noise next to my car. A woman and a child were walking by. Sarah! The child next to my car squeaked, and she ran toward the other child, who I realized was Hope, and ran toward her. They were only a few feet away from my car, and I took a few more quick pictures. I started my car and drove off before either of the two women became interested in the strange car and man parked on their street. I drove a short distance away and stopped to look at the pictures. 4 were absolutely perfect. I could even make out her blue eyes. I drove back to Fort Hood. The following week, Keith and I finished the course with ease. We graduated on Friday and then had dinner and a few drinks together. Saturday morning, we went to the airport and flew home. Keith to Alaska and me to Seattle. The following Monday was a school day, so I had the day off. I took Lydia's and Hope's DNA reports to the DNA testing center. The lady didn't remember me until I reminded her about the pacifier. I gave her Lydia and Hope's DNA results and handed her the coffee cup with the gum. "See? You in 3 weeks," I said as I left. In fact, it only took 2 this time. She gave me the results over the phone. "It's a married couple, no doubt," she said. "Mother, father, and child." She would send me the official results in the mail. Okay, I had all the information I needed, but what was it for? What was I going to do with it? All it did was confirm that Weber was, in fact, the guy Lydia had cheated with. I went to Walmart and bought paper and envelopes. I also made copies of 2 photographs of Hope and the DNA reports belonging to Weber, Lydia, and Hope. On the DNA reports, I cut off anything that could tell where the report came from. I put it all in an envelope. I made sure I had gloves on from the moment I opened the bag of paper and the box of envelopes, made copies of the photos and DNA reports, and even used self-adhesive stamps and water, not saliva, to seal the envelope. I made every effort to keep it untraceable. I addressed it to Mrs. Kurt Weber at their home address. I also included Lydia's name and her parents' address because I had no idea where she was. Then I drove to Seattle's main post office and dropped the letter in the mailbox. I had no idea what would happen in Texas' home of Fort Hood and the Weber family when the package arrived. The news from Keith was a little over a month old when I got a call from Aunt Lucy. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer," she said. "I'll do my best. Whatever you're doing isn't good enough. I need complete honesty. Is that what you and Keith did to Weber? Aunt Lucy, I don't mean to sound smart, but what did we do to him? Set him up so his wife would file for divorce. Okay, here's what I did. Keith had nothing to do with it. I told her the truth, most of it anyway. I omitted Keith's part. You certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. Apparently, when his wife received your package, she didn't know if your DNA was his or someone else's, so she did it herself. She took some of his DNA and sent it off for processing. She also sent the profiles of that woman and the baby. They matched, and that's where it all went downhill. Who was the woman he was flirting with? She was my wife, Aunt Lucy. Oh, Jesus, I thought it might be something like that. Well, he was brought into the office yesterday and he's not thrilled. He was ranting and raving all over the base. Good hearing from you that his marriage is over is the best news I've heard in a while. I just feel sorry for his family. It was over for me. Lydia and I were divorced and Weber was on the road to divorce. I folded all the papers Keith had given me into a folder and put it in a box with other things I no longer needed but kept anyway. My life was moving on. Over the next few months, I went on a couple of dates, but nothing much happened. 2 years later, I returned to Fort Hood. I was surprised because I expected to be sent overseas like 90% of my classmates. Once in Hood, I found myself in Aunt Lucy's office. "How did you get back here?" she asked. "I have no idea." "Yes," came a voice from the past. It was newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel LTC Keith Franklin. He walked into the office, closed the door, and we shook hands. It turned out I needed an assistant, and a major who had just graduated from CGSC was just what I needed, so I asked for him. Keith and I had talked a few times since we arrived at the seminar but hadn't seen each other. I was glad to see my friend. After registering, I took a vacation for 2 weeks. The first thing I did was to look for a house. Lydia and I had been saving up to buy it. I assumed that she would get half of it in the divorce, but since she didn't show up in court, I got everything. The branch manager walked by. He introduced himself as Dwight Randolph. We moved here about 6 months ago and settled in a brand new neighborhood. The houses are very nice and inexpensive. You get a lot of value for your money. He told me this, then went to his office and returned with a business card from the agent whose services he had used. I called her, and it only took me 3 days to find what I wanted. I paid more than half of the down payment, and the bank was happy to finance the rest. I started working with Keith and moved into my new house. The first things I bought were a bed, a chair, a big TV, and a lawnmower. I was spending my first night in my new house. It was already dark outside, and I had no curtains or drapes. There weren't even enough sheets to cover the big front window. I had just opened a beer and was holding a slice of pepperoni pizza in my hand when the doorbell rang. I had long since gotten off the no red meat diet Lydia had kept me on. I opened the door, and there stood a woman. "Hi, neighbor," she said. "My name is Samantha Randolph, but everyone calls me Sammy. We live in the neighborhood. We haven't lived here long ourselves, and I just wanted to say hello, introduce myself, and tell you that if you need anything, just ask." "Is your wife here?" I smiled. "Fred Sadler, no wife, divorced." I saw her frown. "But don't worry, I don't throw loud wild parties or even soft wild parties." She smiled. We chatted for a few more minutes before she left. The first week in my new home flew by. On Saturday morning, 3 women rang the doorbell and brought food. They also brought decorating ideas. They had seen my empty house with the lights on at night as I sat in it with nothing but a chair, TV, beer, and pizza. They decided it was time to help me. The ringleader was Sammy Randolph. A couple of hours later, I had a slightly worn but nice leather couch, a dining table and chairs, and a small coffee table to keep the pizza off the floor. The ladies were about to leave when 3 small children came running in, chasing each other. One of the ladies, Ruth, grabbed 2 of the children, and Sammy grabbed the third. "Calm down, Sarah," she said, kneeling beside the child and brushing her blonde hair away from her blue eyes. "This is our new neighbor, Major Sadler." "Hello," she said confidently. "My name is Sarah." I leaned over. "Hi, Sarah," I said, looking into her piercing blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes. I shook my head. "How old are you, Sarah?" "I'll be 7 soon." I stood up and we all said our goodbyes. As soon as they left, I went to the room that was to be my den, found the right box, opened it, and pulled out a folder. In it were the pictures I had taken. It was the same baby. I hadn't paid attention to the names of the parents before, but now I did. The adoption papers named Dwight and Samantha Randolph as Hope's adoptive parents. Sammy and her friend mostly decorated my house. It took a few weeks, and when it was done, we had a neighborhood open house. Sammy invited her sister-in-law, Joni Payne, who happened to be divorced. I hadn't enjoyed female companionship in a long time, and Joni and I hit it off right away. She was the last to leave the party, and I couldn't wait to call her. The next day, we met for lunch and had dinner with Dwight, Sammy, and Sarah. Sarah was brief because she wanted to go play with her friends. Over the next few months, we were together as often as possible. The first night we spent together was very good. We were sitting at the kitchen island when the doorbell rang. I threw on my robe and went to answer it. It was Sammy. "Good afternoon, Fred," she said as she walked inside. We were wondering. She saw Joni. "Well, what do we have here?" she asked, heading toward her sister-in-law. Joni was sitting on a stool, eating a ham and cheese sandwich. As Sammy approached her, she set the sandwich aside and turned to face her sister-in-law. Her robe was open, and Sammy reached up to close it. Joni laughed. "Too late for modesty, sis. He's already seen everything. In fact, he's—" "Never mind," Sammy said. I left the room and went upstairs to get dressed. When I came back, they were still discussing my bedspread. When they saw that I was dressed, they fell silent. The following weekend, Dwight and Sammy asked Joni to watch Sarah while the 2 of them went out to dinner. We were in the backyard watching Sarah in her sandbox. Without looking at Joni, I said, "She's a beautiful child, isn't she?" "Yes, she is." "Did you know she was adopted?" "Really?" "Yes, they've had her since she was born. According to the adoption agency, the birth mother was married, had an affair with a man she doesn't even remember, and got pregnant. Her husband was in the military. She didn't want him to find out about her affair, so she gave Sarah up for adoption. Dwight and Sammy were there to take her home. Sarah is the name her own mother gave her." "No, that name was Hope. It's on the birth certificate, but Sammy and Dwight changed it. Sarah suits her better." "What happened to the birth mother and her husband?" "I have no idea. The adoption agency closes their files very tightly. They don't give the birth mother access to information about the adoptive family and vice versa." Sarah came over and wanted to sit on Joni's lap. She leaned her head against Joni's and fell asleep almost immediately. A few minutes later, Joni asked me to carry Sarah into the bedroom and put her to bed. It was my first time touching her, and I felt very uncomfortable. I gladly laid her down. 7 months later, Joni moved in with me. A year after that, we were married. We had a very happy year until the Army intervened. We were told we were being sent to Germany for 3 years of service. We took 2 trips to the States, one when her father and Dwight's father died, and the other for the reunion. Both times, of course, we saw Dwight and Sammy. We saw Sarah at the funeral, but when we went back for the reunion, she was at camp. After 3 years, we received orders to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was going as a new LTC assigned to the post headquarters as an executive officer under the post commander. This was normally a position for a colonel, not a junior lieutenant colonel, but I didn't mind. In the military world, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. To help me get settled in, the staff organized a series of briefings with the various departments that support the post. One of the briefings was to be given by a post engineer. Representatives from that department, as well as the post engineer himself, were already in the conference room when I arrived. I sat down in my seat at the table and watched as a blue-eyed civilian stood up to begin his speech. His hair was slightly blonde but with a touch of gray. He introduced himself as Kurt Weber. I just stared at him. He had been talking for an hour, and I hadn't heard a word, and my gaze never left his face. It was obvious that he was uncomfortable with me looking at him. At the end of his speech, he asked if I had any questions. "Tell me, Mr. Weber, have you ever been to Fort Hood?" "Yes, sir. I was in the engineering department." "Did you like it there?" "Yes, sir. Why did you leave?" "It's rather personal, sir." "You are correct. I withdraw the question. I'd just like to know about the people I work with. I seem to recall a scandal at the Fort Hood engineering department a few years ago." "Do you know anything about that?" "I vaguely recall something about one thing. There was someone cheating, if I remember correctly." "Ah, well, I just remembered something. Thanks for the briefing. If you need anything at headquarters, feel free to contact me." "Just in case you forgot," I pointed to the name tag on my uniform. "My name is Sadler, Sadler, Fred Sadler. I wouldn't want you to forget it." I was still looking straight into his eyes, and I could see the light. Bulb turn on and his eyes get huge. Kurt Weber became several different colors, ranging from red to pale gray. I got up and walked away. In the afternoon, I learned that Mr. Kurt Weber had requested a transfer. Unfortunately for him, this request had to go through me. When I received it the next day, I wrote in large letters, "Response, I have plans that involve Mr. Weber's expertise. He will play a key role in the realization of these plans." The next day, to the surprise of almost everyone, Mr. Kurt Weber tendered his immediate resignation. I signed it. Every day, I fell more and more in love with Joni. I watched her become increasingly beautiful and hot. Every morning I looked in the mirror and saw an aging, middle-aged man, wondering what she saw in me. But whatever it was, I was grateful for it. We cherished our time together, and years flew by much faster than I wanted. We were stationed in Alaska and traveled to Killeen to visit Sammy and Dwight. On our first evening, they told us about a decision they had made with Sarah, who was almost 18. She had always known she was adopted and was now interested in finding her biological parents. Dwight and Sammy supported her decision, but the adoption agency offered no help, citing compliance with the law. All we heard that first day was how outdated the laws were and how they needed reform, especially since it's important for an adopted child to know their birth parents' health status. They decided to use a website dedicated to DNA and ancestry. They sent Sarah's DNA and waited to see what happened. Sarah hoped her biological mother could attend her high school graduation, but since it was only a couple of weeks away, they doubted it would happen. That night, Joni and I were already in bed when she asked, "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About Sarah." "What about her?" "Come on, Fred, married couples don't have secrets, or shouldn't have any. I found your little file 6 months after we were married. She can avoid DNA testing if you tell them everything you know." "Oh crap," I said. "Yeah, oh crap. Why have you been silent all these years?" "I'm not sure. I guess I knew how sensitive you'd be about it, and Dwight and Sammy didn't need to know, so I kept quiet. But now it's become important, and you have to address it. Any suggestions on how I can do this?" "Just tell the story, I suppose. How do you think they'll take it?" "Dwight is my brother and just like me, so he'll take it normally. Sammy is the dark horse." "Okay, tomorrow we'll get Sarah out of the house and tell them." She leaned over and kissed me gently. "Do I ever bore you?" she asked. "What a silly question," I said. "Of course you don't. Why did you even ask?" "Because you haven't touched me all day." I grinned and reached for the buttons on her pajamas. "I can fix that right now." The next morning was Sunday. Sarah was picked up by her best friend, and they went to the mall. I gathered the four of us around the table, took a deep breath, and began. I started by telling them that Joni and I had packed our things before we went downstairs, so we were ready if they wanted to kick us out. They looked at us, and Joni shrugged. "Sarah doesn't need to give DNA to find her biological parents." "I know who they are," I said. The looks they gave me made it clear I needed to explain, so I told them the whole story. When I finished, I took a deep breath and looked around the table. Dwight just stared at me while Sammy had tears in her eyes. After a few seconds, she stood up, walked over to me, took my hands, pulled me into a hug and said, "Oh, poor guy, living with that all these years and not being able to talk about it. No one deserves that." She hugged me again. "What do you think, Dwight?" she asked her husband. "I'm trying to calculate the probability of how we all ended up together. I don't think there's a big enough number." "So what do we do now?" asked Sammy, returning to her chair. I think Fred should contact his ex-wife and invite her to the graduation, since Sarah wants her there, Joni said. Yeah, why me? I protested. Because you started it, Dwight grinned. But who's going to contact Weber? Not me, I said, and told him about the last time I saw him. You never told me that, Joni said. I didn't realize you knew the whole story, did I? She leaned over and kissed me. I love this woman, I thought. Later that day, when Sarah returned, Dwight and Sammy told her about it. She was both nervous and excited and wanted us to continue. The only way I knew to contact Lydia was through her parents, if they were still alive, if they still lived in Mechanicsburg, and if they still had a landline. I waited until Monday morning and talked to a private investigator. I asked him to help me find Lydia's parents and Kurt Weber. It took him 2 hours to get the parents' phone number. It took longer to find Weber. I called Lydia's parents, reminded them who I was, and told them I needed to talk to Lydia. I gave them my phone number to give to her. Not an hour later, my phone rang. Hello, this is Lydia Bowman. I was given this number. Hi, Lydia. Fred? Yeah. How's it going? She asked, trying to think of something clever to say, but I couldn't. Actually, I'm doing great. How are you? Very well, Lydia. I need to talk to you about something very important. Okay, go ahead. Not over the phone. Tell me where we can meet and we'll talk in person. Explain it to me. We haven't spoken in years, and suddenly, out of the blue, you have something so important that it needs to be discussed in person? That's it? I'm sorry, Fred, I'm not buying it. Okay, but remember I gave you a chance. A chance at what? Come on, Fred, what's the matter? Only in person, Lydia. Call me if you change your mind. Wait, okay, damn it, we live in Vegas. That's better. I'm flying out there tomorrow, and I'll call you when I land. You decide where you want to meet. The next day, we met in the lobby of the Bellagio Hotel. I guess she needed a lot of witnesses. Hi, Lydia. Hello, Fred. This is my husband, Roland Bowman. Hi, Roland. I turned my attention back to Lydia. I need to see you alone for 10 seconds. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Roland. Whatever you say, but this is about the hope you had. She turned pale. Can we still talk? Yes, he knows about her. Okay, let's sit down. We found as quiet a corner as we could, given where we were. I recommended something to drink. Wine will do. We agreed to a red, and I ordered it. We let the waiter pour our glasses. I paid for the wine, and we all took a sip. Her name is Sarah. She is graduating in 2 weeks and wants you to be there. Roland and I watched her faint with a glass of wine in her hand, not spilling a drop. Roland took the glass, set it down, and patted her cheeks until she came to. What did you say? I repeated it, then pulled out Sarah's picture and showed it to Lydia. She started crying, gently touching the picture. She's beautiful. Where did you get this? I took it yesterday in her living room. You took it? How? Why? I told her the whole story from beginning to end, including our failed attempt to find Kurt Weber. She didn't know I knew his name and was shocked again. Initially stunned, she quickly grew really angry. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep her from me all these years? Her voice got louder and louder. Roland jumped up. Calm down. You gave up all rights to her. Fred is breaking the law by doing this now, so chill out. She calmed down. When can I see her? At her graduation if you want to come. Of course I'll come. Can't I see her sooner? You both need time to get used to it. Take your time. How about we get there the day before? She smiled. That would be wonderful. Now, how about I take a picture of you so she can see what you look like? Okay. We found a spot outside for her to pose. When I started to leave, she rushed over, hugged me, and kissed my face and head. Not too demonstrative, is she? Roland asked, laughing. I decided I liked him. That same afternoon, I flew back to prepare Sarah. I showed her a picture of Lydia. She's beautiful, Sarah said. She was very nervous, but excited at the same time. For the first time since I'd known her, she hugged me. Thank you, Uncle Fred. Now we know where you get your beauty, said Sammy, snuggling tightly against Sarah. Do you know what my birth father looks like? Sarah asked timidly. The other 3 adults looked at me with widened eyes, waiting to see what I would say. I thought for a moment before I spoke. Let me tell you that. You got your blonde hair and blue eyes from him. The 3 adults breathed a sigh of relief. We had only taken a week's vacation, so I had to go back to Alaska. But Joni stayed behind to help everyone prepare for the big day. I left for Alaska, promising to be back 2 days before graduation. The day before I was due back in Killeen, I got a call from the private detective. The most he'd been able to find out about Weber was that after leaving government service, he'd taken a job as a consultant to the government of a Middle Eastern country. Like several other American consultants, he disappeared shortly after arriving in country and has not been seen since. I met Lydia and Roland at the airport and drove them straight to Sarah's house. When we entered, she was standing in the middle of the living room. I let Lydia go first. They looked at each other for a long time, then Lydia spoke. "I brought you this," she said, pulling out a pacifier. "It belongs to you, and I thought you might want it back."
I never had a fondness for playing cards. During college, some pals attempted to school me in poker, but I could never grasp it. Consequently, I never bothered to learn the hierarchy of hands or the ins and outs of Texas Hold'em or whatever it's called there. It simply didn't pique my interest. Fed up with constantly losing money to my cutthroat buddies, I gave up playing altogether. In contrast, my wife Kathy adored poker and excelled at it. She participated in local tournaments with success, though she mostly played with her regular circle of friends. They convened once or twice monthly at Larry and Sandy's suburban townhouse. Interestingly, Kathy had known them since college, Katie being her longtime friend and Sandy, her former roommate. The group comprised Larry, Sandy, Kathy, Paul, Brian, and Terry. Though present myself, Paul's wife Mary, and Brian's wife Allison refrained from playing, opting instead to watch TV in the living room. There used to be another player, Wes, but he got the boot for cheating. While I didn't object to Kathy's involvement, it was her crowd, not mine. Mary and Allison were fine, and we were even growing close. However, the others were, at best, tolerable. Interacting with them voluntarily was beyond my imagination, particularly Mark, who was an outright idiot and whom I frankly detested. Terry and Mark felt isolated. Terry, reserved and modest, didn't seem skilled at poker. Mark, on the other hand, was insufferable. If we crossed paths in public, I'd likely ignore him. His demeanor, loud, offensive, and self-absorbed, led to more than one disagreement between us. I tolerated him solely because he belonged to my wife's poker circle, encountering him only during their games. My main gripe with poker nights was how intensely competitive Katie became. If she lost, it cast a shadow over her mood the following day. Despite my attempts to address this, she dismissed my concerns. Lately, she'd been pushing for weekly poker gatherings, a prospect I wasn't keen on, a sentiment shared by Mary and Allison. Thankfully, this staved off the weekly poker plan, for now. One Saturday night at Larry and Sandy's, tensions ran high, particularly for Katie. As the night wore on, I intermittently checked on her, only to be met with her frustration. Eventually, well past the usual end time, I heard commotion from the dining room where they played. Stepping in, I caught Mark's assertion about a bet, backed by Larry's reminder of the rules. Katie reluctantly agreed, signaling her turn to play. "What's going on?" Mark asked with a smirk and a hostile glare. "Katie lost all her money, leaving me the pleasure of the final hand. She's lost, now it's time to settle up. Apologies," Katie assured. "She wouldn't do this to anyone else but me. Hey, buddy, she made a bet and lost. That's the rule." It was at that moment Katie resolved to take charge of her fate. "Henry, it's fine. I lost. I'll pay," Katie conceded. "No, Katie. You owe me loyalty. Trying to settle for less would be cheating me," Henry protested. Mark's behavior only confirmed my suspicion of his character. "You're witnessing this, so it's not betrayal," he argued. Fed up, I snapped, "Shut up, you fool! This isn't about you!" Turning to Katie, I urged, "Let's go. We're leaving." Katie hesitated. "Henry, I hate to do this, but I must. If I don't, I'll be kicked out." My response was firm. "I don't care if you're expelled. I don't care if you never play poker again." I approached Went, calling out, "Hey guys, I need your help." Katie glanced at Paul and Brian, signaling toward me with a tilt of her head. As I moved closer to her, Paul and Brian grabbed me from behind. I struggled, but Larry stepped in, assisting them in restraining me. "Are you serious? You idiots!" I exclaimed. "You're going to hold me down while my wife does this in front of me?" Larry responded calmly. "She made a bet and knew the consequences. She's choosing to stay, so she pays up." He chuckled. "Don't worry, Mark won't be around much longer. He really was an idiot." Mark then advanced, ending up directly in front of Katie, who was kneeling. "Catherine, if you go through with this, it's over," I stated calmly, emphasizing her full name. "Stop being dramatic, Henry," she retorted. As she leaned forward, I let out a loud scream, halting her. "Hold on a moment," I interjected. She paused, meeting my gaze. "I just want to be clear. Is everyone okay with this?" Silence filled the room until Mark stepped forward, dismissing my concerns. "Come on, he's spoiling the mood," he declared. Katie, leaning forward, intervened. "Okay, that's enough. I can't bear to see it anymore. Let me go, and I'll leave." With a burgeoning plan in mind, I realized it wasn't over between Katie and me. I needed to exact revenge on this fool. Katie paused, signaling to the men restraining me. They released their hold, and I calmly approached Katie. Pretending to struggle with my wedding ring, I extended my left hand with fingers spread wide, while my right hand clenched into a fist. Katie knelt determinedly to my left, while Mark grinned menacingly to my right. "I warned you, Katie. If you go through with this, we're done," I reiterated, standing beside them and locking eyes with her. "You went ahead and did it, Catherine, and with such a fool," I muttered. As I uttered this, I struck Mark in the nose with the back of my right fist, prompting him to shield his face with both hands. Swiftly, I pivoted to his right, delivering another blow with my left fist as he cowered, causing him to topple backward. His trousers and underwear pooled around his ankles, leading to a clumsy fall onto his backside and then flat onto the floor, landing between the dining table and a large antique cabinet. Fueled by anger, I acted on impulse. Katie stumbled backward, landing on her rear, while I loomed over Mark, positioned at his feet. To my right stood a spacious dining table, accommodating 8 people comfortably, with 3 chairs on each side. On my left loomed an imposing antique wardrobe, measuring at least 6 feet in length. Its oak base stood approximately 30 inches tall, adorned with numerous drawers and doors, while the top half, another 40 inches higher, boasted mirrored glass doors enclosing various collectibles such as china, Hummel figurines, and snow globes. Grabbing the top of the antique cabinet, I knew toppling it over wasn't feasible, but I hoped to instill fear. The weighty base, filled with contents, likely exceeded 300 pounds, while the top half, supported by a wooden frame, housed delicate items. Unfortunately for Mark, Larry had never properly secured the top half to the base. As I tugged on it, the top half of the cabinet teetered over. Though I hadn't intended to bring it down on Mark, I was oddly satisfied with the outcome. The ensuing crash echoed like an explosion. Fortunately for Mark, the space between the cabinet stand and the table prevented it from landing on him. Instead, the lower portion remained on the stand, while the upper part collided with the dining table. Regrettably for Mark, the contents of the cabinet cascaded forward, smashing through its glass doors. Shards of glass rained down on him, along with the items inside, resulting in numerous cuts. Thankfully, he shielded his bloodied face with his hands, preventing glass from injuring his broken nose or eyes. Unfortunately for Mark, when he hit the floor, his shirt rode up to his stomach due to his jeans and boxers being pulled down to his ankles, leaving his upper abdomen to his shins exposed. The scene unfolded rapidly, leaving everyone in stunned silence. In the midst of it all, I remained in improvisation mode. Pretending to be concerned, I circled the table where his head lay and loudly advised, "Don't touch him, get an ambulance." Upon reaching his head, I crouched so low that only he could hear me and whispered, "I hope you bleed. But if not, find me later and we'll discuss it. Just so you know, there's glass everywhere. I wouldn't move much if I were you." Sandy emerged from the kitchen announcing, "The ambulance is on its way. ETA is 5 minutes. Should we also call the police?" Katie and I responded simultaneously. She declined while I insisted, "Absolutely." Katie wasn't naive. She understood that involving the police meant filing a report and giving statements. Larry was furious. "Dude, you practically eliminated him and wrecked my cabinet. We need to call the cops," he argued. "I didn't try to eliminate him, but I agree we should call the police," I conceded. Personally, I'd welcome talking to them. "Isn't this like soliciting lovemaking for money?" I challenged. "I'll look into it. They'll never buy it," I continued. Larry countered. "Who do you think they'll believe? Me or the guy lying here half unclothed, who isn't married to any of the women?" I relented. "Maybe I'm wrong. Go ahead, call them. Do as you wish." "Please, call the police. I'll wait outside for the ambulance," I added. I circled the table and approached Katie, who was now kneeling beside Mark. Squatting down beside her, I removed my wedding ring and tossed it into the shattered glass near Mark's head. "You know what, Catherine? I don't think I'll be needing this anymore. If you want, you can fish it out of the glass." Confused, Katie looked at me with teary eyes and asked, "Cards next to his head? What are these? Extra cards?" "Wait, the guy you left your marriage for is a cheater? Are you kidding me?" I exclaimed. "Mark, you're an idiot. I almost betrayed my husband and you actually cheated?" There's a big difference between almost cheating and actually cheating. Deciding to address it later, I noted that Mark couldn't speak due to the shards of glass covering his face, with blood now splattered everywhere. "Stay here, Catherine. I'll go outside and meet the ambulance. They should be here any minute. I'll inform you when they arrive. I exited through the front door, hopped into my car, and drove off. 2 blocks down, I encountered an ambulance cruising slowly, scanning house numbers with its spotlight. Passing by, I continued on my way home. Upon arrival, I entered the house and commenced packing, anticipating the imminent arrival of the police. Gathering a small suitcase and a couple of duffel bags, I hastily tossed in essentials. Over the next few days, I completed my packing. Just as I was zipping up my suitcase, I heard Katie enter the front door, calling out, "Henry, where are you?" Ignoring her, I proceeded to leave the bedroom with my bags. "Oh, there you are," she exclaimed upon spotting me. "Henry, what are you doing? You don't have to leave," she pleaded. "God, you know." "Uh-oh," I began, addressing Mark. "I know what you did to me, Mark. What about Larry and Brian? Or do you only target married men? And you chose to kneel down instead of settling in cash. By the way, what was the bet?" Katie interjected. "Henry, stop it." Mark was the only exception, regardless of the stakes. It was a matter of principle. I didn't intend to have lovemaking with him. Plus, you intervened. "Did I stop you? You were already getting down to business," she retorted, deflecting the question. "I managed to prevent them from involving the police and retrieved your ring from the shattered glass." "I've said it before, I don't care. They should call the cops. Heck, I could have eliminated him." "Maybe I should confess to the police," I pondered aloud. "No, Henry, that's a bad idea," she cautioned. "We'll cover the damages ourselves. Screw them. I won't give them a cent." "When's your next poker night?" I inquired. "Not for a couple of weeks. Mark won't be invited back, so don't worry. We'll have time to recover," she assured. "Henry, where are you going?" she called out as I headed towards the door. By the time she finished speaking, I was already outside. Climbing into my car, I drove off while she stood at the front door shouting after me. Ignoring her, I drove several miles until I found a motel and booked a room for the night. I switched off my phone and spent the night staring at the ceiling. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep around 5 in the morning, awakening at 10. After showering, I paid for my stay until Wednesday at the front desk. Upon turning my phone back on, I found a dozen missed calls from Katie, along with another dozen from Allison and Mary. There were numerous messages from Katie explaining her actions and insisting it meant nothing to us. Despite regretting what happened, she tried to rationalize it, claiming it was merely a bet. I responded with a single text, suggesting she forward all her messages to her mother to gauge her perception of the situation. Then I turned off my phone again. I spent 2 hours on a park bench, followed by an hour wandering around the mall, and another hour on a different park bench. Later, I visited the supermarket and stocked up on junk food before returning to my motel room, spending the remainder of the night indulging in snacks and researching scams online. Exhausted by 10 o'clock, I drifted off to sleep. Monday morning, I attempted to focus on work, but my boss noticed my distraction and inquired about the issue. When I explained my family troubles, he suggested I take a few days off. He advised me to call on Wednesday to confirm if I needed additional time off for the rest of the week. As it was time to leave anyway, I decided to stop by the local bar and grill for a couple of beers and some better food than what I had purchased at the supermarket. Not wanting to engage with anyone, I retreated to the back of the restaurant and settled into a booth, regardless of my preference. Suddenly, 2 figures approached, neither of them the waitress. "Hey, Henry, mind if Allison and I join you?" one of them asked. I disregarded their presence and took a sip of ice water. "Are you mad at us too? What did we do?" they inquired. "Nothing. You two did absolutely nothing," I replied calmly. Mary and Allison slid into the booth across from me, with Allison speaking next. "Henry, if Mary and I didn't do anything, why are you upset with us? I know you're not keen on people playing poker with Katie, but I thought we were friends," she expressed. "I thought so too, but you didn't do anything. Seriously, you're both asking me this," I retorted sharply, keeping my voice level. "You stood by as your husband restrained me while my wife attended to another man without my consent, and you remained silent." The 2 of them sat in silence. "What kind of friends are you?" At one point, I looked around, pleading for someone to intervene, and you two said nothing. "I didn't think she'd actually do it," Mary confessed. "I thought it was just a dumb joke. I couldn't believe she went through with it," Allison added, expressing her remorse. "She feels awful now. She's worried you might show these messages to her mom. You wouldn't, right?" "Not yet, but I will if necessary. Everyone knows how bad the situation was. We discussed it after you left and the ambulance took Mark away. Larry and Sandy assured they wouldn't involve the police. You'll just have to cover the damages," I explained. Listen, Mary, I'm not paying anyone anything, I declared firmly. Larry and Sandy may have helped Katie with her apparent gambling issue, but that doesn't excuse their involvement. Sandy stood by and watched while Larry actively restrained me while Katie destroyed our marriage just to avoid getting kicked out of the damn poker group. Henry, she's a mess. Please try to forgive her, Mary pleaded. I'm not sure she even wants forgiveness. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. She probably expects an apology from me for stopping her from settling her bet, I retorted. Suddenly, Allison had an idea. What if we level the playing field? What if you find someone who will satisfy you in return? I responded to her slowly and deliberately as if explaining to a child. Consider this. We were in a room, presumably among friends. Then those very friends held me back so she could settle the bet. Now, to level the playing field, I must find a woman to please me. Essentially, I embarrass myself in front of her friends, and she simply hears that I retaliated. The image of her on her knees is seared into my memory. On the flip side, she may not even believe I got even. She could just pretend it didn't happen. But I saw it. There has to be a way to put an end to this. I hate seeing my friends endure nonsense, Mary. You claim not to want to see me hurt. But were you okay with how hurt I was on Saturday? You stood by while all this unfolded. I was suffering, yet you paid no heed. Friends don't do that. We're not friends. In my view, these two were as culpable as anyone else. I've been concocting a plan for a bit of payback. I just need to set it in motion. If someone had spoken up, I'm certain this wouldn't have occurred. You could have said something to your husbands. It might have sparked a confrontation, but it could have saved my marriage. It's time to offer them some hope, but I'm unsure if there's a way to level the playing field, as you suggest. I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea, I just don't see how. What if one of us does it? I glanced at Allison for about 10 seconds. What if it's both of you? Wait, you want us to even the score? Mary asked. I can't do this. Paul will be furious if he finds out. I understand perfectly, I quipped sarcastically. The guy who restrained me while my wife betrayed me. I see everything crystal clear. I'll do it, Allison volunteered, surprising both of us. You're right. We bear some responsibility, she admitted. I can't go along with this, Mary interjected. And it's unfair of you to put me in this position, Henry. If Allison is willing to assist, that should suffice. No, I countered. The bait has been set. Now it's time to reel them in. Neither of you means anything to me. This is part of the negotiation. I don't seek balance. I demand the scales tip in my favor. Mary pondered silently for about 2 minutes. The longer she deliberated, the more confident I grew in handling the situation. If we agree to this, will you forgive Katie? She asked finally. If you refuse, I won't even consider it. You won't tell Paul? She continued. I won't utter a word, I assured her. Technically, it wasn't a lie. I hadn't planned to verbalize it. With a motel room booked until Wednesday morning, I intended to hold out until the weekend before deciding whether to return home or seek a new place. I can't believe this is happening, Mary exclaimed. Welcome to my world, I retorted sarcastically. Look, if it's that awful for you, just let it go, I suggested. That's not the issue, Henry. I care about you and you're a good guy. If I weren't married, I'd be with you in a heartbeat. But I am married. You're pushing me into cheating on my husband, Mary explained. Mary, I'm not forcing you into anything, I clarified. I know. All right. If it helps you move past what my husband did, then I'll do it. Either way, it's his fault. If he wasn't an idiot, I wouldn't be in this situation. As for me, she can justify it however she wants. It's my way of getting back at her damn husband, so I don't care, I thought to myself. Okay, let's meet tomorrow evening in my room at 6 o'clock. I'll bring some food and wine, I proposed. Both women rose from the table and departed, engaged in conversation. They seemed eager for tomorrow night and not at all upset. Am I the only one who takes marriage vows seriously? I know what you're thinking. Here I am, a married guy planning to date 2 married women, all while preaching about the sanctity of marriage, I reflected. But she cheated on me. By doing that, she disrespected and embarrassed me. Our marriage was already null and void. I no longer honored those vows. It was all over except for the paperwork and the women I was about to meet. They and their husbands were partly responsible, so to hell with them. I'll never understand those people whose spouses cheat, yet they insist on upholding the sanctity of marriage. Blah, blah, blah. My motto is, what's good for the goose? I acknowledge that she didn't intend to betray me, but it wasn't hard for her to agree to it when her coveted spot in the poker group was at stake. Yes, I may be unreasonable, Yes, she needs assistance with her gambling issue. However, she may not seek help until she hits rock bottom. Maybe divorce is that rock bottom. The following day, Tuesday, I returned to my hometown, ensuring Katie wasn't present, and entered to gather some new belongings. It was tough walking through my house, seeing remnants of my life everywhere, knowing it would never be the same. Each time sentimentality crept in, I envisioned her kneeling in front of Mark. The anger remained potent, so I opted not to take anything that might remind me of her. I grabbed some electronics, my laptop, iPad, camera, along with basic tools and clothing. I resolved to start apartment hunting after leaving and return later for the remaining items. I didn't need much. Departing the house, I scouted for apartments and found an affordable furnished one-bedroom unit available for monthly rent. I could move in any time after Saturday. After finalizing the lease, I went for lunch and prepared to meet the girls. At Best Buy, I purchased an Apple SD card reader and a dozen SD cards. I also acquired the cheapest wireless color printer they had. Then I visited a liquor store and picked up a couple of bottles of wine I knew Mary and Allison favored. I returned to the motel room and arranged my belongings to create a cluttered appearance, strategically placing the 35mm camera for an unobstructed view of the bed. Due to the room's disarray, the camera remained inconspicuous. Around 5:30, I ordered appetizers from a nearby restaurant, which arrived just before 6. At 6:15, a gentle knock sounded on the door. Peering through the peephole, I ensured it was the women and not irate husbands. I wasn't particularly fearful of my own husband, but I preferred not to be caught off guard again. I activated the camera to record and welcomed the women inside, offering them wine. Initially hesitant, they eventually accepted, reasoning that a bit of liquid courage wouldn't hurt. Ladies, we don't have to do this. We can simply enjoy wine, food, and each other's company. You both know I would never pressure you into anything you're not comfortable with, I asserted. I understand, Henry, Allison replied. You're such a kind person. It's a shame Brian isn't as considerate as you. Katie truly lucked out. Mary and I have discussed this since we parted ways yesterday. You were correct. Our silence was a failure on our part. By not speaking up, we were taking action. I deeply regret our inaction. I appreciate that. I just want to understand where I went wrong, I replied. What do you mean, what you did wrong, Mary? It's hard to believe Katie made such a sudden decision. If she intended to involve me, she should have done so before I arrived. I simply want to know what I did to make her think this was acceptable. Henry, I truly believe Saturday was the first time something like this happened. It's impossible to keep something like this a secret. The truth always surfaces, Mary explained, unsure how accurate her statement was. All right, let's get started, Allison interjected eagerly. You go to the bed and stand. Following her instructions, I positioned myself as she directed. I'll undress you now. Stay still. No hands. I want to do this myself. Meanwhile, Mary settled into the office chair by the desk, wearing a broad smile. It made me wonder if these two had experience with such encounters. Mary positioned herself perfectly to record everything on video. Allison unbuttoned my shirt, sliding it down my arms, leaving them extended outwards. With a wide grin, she ran her hands over my chest. She then untied my shoes, having me lift each foot for removal, followed by taking off my socks. Proceeding, she unbuckled my belt, unbuttoned my jeans, and pulled them down over my hips. Once my jeans were off, Allison knelt in front of me. Though I wanted to hasten the process, I restrained myself, allowing her to proceed at her pace, which was remarkable. Fortunately, Brian was lucky as it didn't take long. When she finished, she knelt back and looked up at me. Tenderly, I leaned down and kissed her forehead. That was incredible, Allison. Absolutely incredible. Mary, I'll need a moment to recharge the batteries, I quipped. We settled down, indulging in some of the food and wine we had brought along. During our meal, we revisited the events of Saturday night after I left Larry and Sandy's. Allison spoke up first. You were there when Katie discovered the cards near Mark's shoulder and accused him of cheating. Initially, he struggled to speak as glass rained down on him, fearing it might enter his injured nose or mouth. Mary chimed in next. His reaction when the ambulance arrived was priceless, albeit delayed. It took a bit longer than expected for them to pry his hands away from his face. He looked dreadful, to say the least. So much for, I'll go meet the ambulance, Allison remarked, mimicking me with a smirk. I replied, feigning forgetfulness. Must have slipped my mind. Unfortunately, he managed to pull through. Mary shuddered at the memory. Then he goes on about not cheating, claiming Katie owes him a bet and how he'll seek retribution. Blah, blah, blah. Allison added. And the blood. Oh, the blood, she continued. It was everywhere. The EMTs didn't even attempt to clean him up. They just covered him and whisked him away. Mary took matters into her own hands. Katie insisted she wouldn't settle their bet unless he could prove he didn't cheat. At this point, I interjected, so if Mark proves he's innocent, she'll still honor the bet? A significant pause followed as the girls fell silent. Then Mary resumed. I don't think there's much cause for concern right now. Are you absolutely certain? I responded. As I mentioned, Mark sustained numerous cuts all over his body. Most were minor, but he had a couple of deeper cuts on his abdomen requiring stitches. He remained hospitalized until Monday to have all the glass removed. Larry visited him at the hospital and had a conversation with him, Allison added. He was livid, threatening to not only collect the bet from Katie, but also to engage in carnal activities with her right in front of you. Mary intervened once more, stating, I highly doubt Mark will be welcome back given his cheating. However, Larry's also upset with you. He believes you're liable for the damaged curio cabinet and is frustrated that his homeowner's insurance will need to cover the hospital expenses. Additionally, he expects you to reimburse for the broken items in the cabinet. Mary, relay my message. Inform Larry and Sandy that I'll only settle for $0.10 if instructed by the judge. Legal documents and testimonies will be provided to support this. My statement will depict the situation as if I stumbled upon a full-blown orgy, and when I intervened to stop my wife's involvement, I was unlawfully restrained by Larry, Brian, and Paul. It will include the names of all participants and witnesses present. Copies will be distributed to neighbors, family, friends, colleagues, and even churches attended by anyone involved. If possible, I'll reach out to Oprah and share the story with the world. We sat in silence for about half a minute until Mary exclaimed, All right, it's my turn, let's do this. Sure, but I want both of you unclothed too, I insisted. We don't have to be undressed for this, Allison chuckled. I know we don't have to, but I feel a bit awkward, I responded. Forget about it, Mary exclaimed. We've come this far. What's the difference? With that, she undressed, and Allison followed suit. I stood at the edge of the bed once more, and this time it was Mary who knelt down without hesitation. I was trying to distract myself from the situation and prolong the process when Allison rose from her chair, pushed me onto the bed, leaving Mary on her knees. I landed on my back as Allison jumped onto the bed. After about 5 minutes, it seemed to be winding down when Mary interjected, All right, it's my turn now. Allison, move over so I can join. Allison giggled, rolled aside, and Mary took her place. Eventually, Mary rolled off and lay beside me. So I asked, Have you done this before? We had our moments. You know we went to college together, right? Well, we had a few experiences, Mary recounted. That's right, Mary, Allison chuckled. A few times, Mary corrected, laughing. More like 100, Mary added before saying, Okay, it was fun, but I should head out. Henry, I hope this helps tip the scales in your favor. Please call me tomorrow and let me know what you think. I really hope you two can get through this. I don't want to lose you as friends. Allison chimed in, Henry, we're truly sorry we didn't speak up when everything was happening. Please call me tomorrow so we can talk. And if you need to talk later, you can call me anytime. Just to be clear, this was probably the only solution, I stated. Probably? Mary questioned. Come on, Mary, that's all we've been discussing since last night. You know we'll do it again. We just need to be more discreet than doing it in front of everyone during a poker game. Agreed? Agreed, I chuckled. We'll talk tomorrow. I'll call you someday. With that, the girls left, and I began working on the video I had made. I edited it down to the risque parts and printed out some compromising still photos of both women. Then I copied the edited video onto the remaining SD cards and prepared 9 identical envelopes, each containing an SD card and several explicit photos of the girls. Although it would have been obvious to anyone familiar with us, I cropped the photos and blurred the video to conceal my face. Afterward, I went to bed and quickly fell asleep. Wednesday morning, I woke up early, turned my phone back on, and noticed another dozen missed calls and messages from Katie. I didn't listen to or read them, but I also didn't delete them. I called my boss and informed him I'd be taking the rest of the week off, then returned home after Katie had left for work to pack up more of my tools and personal belongings. During lunch, Katie called me again. This time I answered the call curtly, saying, What? Her response was delayed as she seemed taken aback that I had actually picked up. Oh my God, Henry, please don't hang up. Where are you? We need to talk. We can work through this. Please just talk to me. Where did you stop? Please come home so we can resolve this. Please. Interrupting her, I said, Katie, just listen for a moment. We'll meet on Saturday. I'll be there at 6 p.m. Make sure everyone who was with Larry and Sandy is there, except your guy. If he shows up, I'll deal with him again. He's not my guy, Henry. Besides, he's not really up for going out right now. As you say, Saturday at 6 o'clock. This isn't a party, it's a discussion. You and your friends can try to convince me why I shouldn't divorce you. I haven't listened to your messages, so be prepared for what you have to say. Tell your friends not to be late. Henry, please don't jeopardize our marriage over a trivial debt. When's the next poker night? Not sure. Maybe in a couple more weeks. You don't have to attend if you don't want to. See you on Saturday. All right. Henry, I love you. Please come back home. See you on Saturday. She simply couldn't grasp it. She believed the issue was merely my exaggerated reaction to what she perceived as fulfilling her obligation. She failed to perceive the larger picture. She genuinely didn't recognize her problem. Honoring the poker bet seemed more crucial to her than upholding our marriage vows. She hasn't reached her lowest point yet. The remainder of the week passed relatively calmly. I went to Walmart and purchased items necessary for my new apartment's bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom. I ended up buying more items than anticipated. Then I checked into a motel for the night. My evenings were spent researching divorce. We didn't have children, and with the house sale, we could each expect about $15,000. Our debts were minimal, and our incomes were similar. It should be relatively straightforward. On Saturday afternoon, I messaged Katie, requesting her to text me when everyone had gathered. I didn't want to endure an awkward silence while waiting for someone to arrive or have to rehash everything if someone was late. At 5:45, she messaged that everyone was already assembled and waiting in the dining room. At 5:55, I rang the doorbell of our house. Honey, it's your house. No need to ring the doorbell, Katie mentioned, opening the door. As you wish, I replied, passing by her. As I stepped into the dining room, I carried a small duffel bag stuffed with envelopes. All the dining furniture was passed down by Grandma Katie. The table was quite spacious for 10 people, with 4 chairs on each side and 1 at each end. Upon my arrival, 3 empty seats were beside me. Larry occupied the far right seat, while Sandy sat on the left with his back turned. To Sandy's left were 3 vacant seats beside Larry's right. Facing me were Paul, then Brian, followed by Mary, and finally Allison. Positioned at the head of the table to the left sat Terry. Katie brushed past me and settled in the middle of the 3 empty seats, hoping I'd take the seat next to her. I headed to the left end of the table where Terry was seated and stated, "This is my spot." Katie suggested, "You could sit next to me, Henry. Let's bet her on BJ that I'll sit here. Who knows, it might lead to something." Katie, put your phone on record. I've got a hunch you'll need it someday. Without a word, Terry stood and shifted to the other side of Katie. An empty seat was to my right, where I placed my gym bag. Katie activated the recording app on her iPhone and positioned it on the table. Taking my seat, I surveyed the table. Following an uneasy silence, I addressed the gathering. All right, we all know why we're here. I'm contemplating divorcing Catherine. If any of you care to persuade me otherwise, now's your chance. Terry, why don't you start? Look, Henry, I may not be the best person to advise on this. My wife cheated on me, and it led to our divorce. I'm truly sorry you're going through this. Clearly, Terry hadn't come prepared for the meeting. Thanks, Terry. I appreciate your candor. I might have more questions later. I glanced around at the faces seated at the table. Larry, what's your take on this? I inquired. It's no issue for me. She adores you, and she's gorgeous. Did you expect her to be a saint when you met her? No, I responded, but I hoped she'd aspire to be one. Would you be okay if Sandy entertained other men after we got together? Larry fell silent, and Sandy squirmed in her chair. With my trademark sarcasm and purely in jest, I quipped, So, how long have you two been openly cheating on each other? Sandy blushed, and jaws dropped all around except for Larry's, who shot me a piercing look but remained silent. Katie blurted out, Sandy, really? Suddenly, Sandy had an honesty outburst. We only did it 3 times. I hate it, but Larry insists we continue. I want to stop. I despise this. All right, Sandy, I responded calmly. Why don't you and Catherine discuss this later? You shouldn't feel pressured to do anything you're not comfortable with. You know what an idiot you are, Larry erupted. I warned Katie when she started dating you, and you couldn't handle poker, that you were an idiot and she should dump you. She should have left you long ago. You wrecked thousands of dollars worth of stuff in my house because your wife honored the bet. Maybe I should just trash everything here. Come on, I replied calmly. All this furniture belonged to your friend Catherine's grandmother. It means nothing to me. He sank back into his chair, breathing heavily, his glare fixed on me like a dagger. Paul, Brian, any input from you guys? Listen, man, Paul started. None of us want to see our friends split up. I mean, you guys have been part of our circle for years, I interjected. No, Paul, you're not friends with us. You're friends with Catherine, and I'm her husband. But you are friends with my wife, he argued. That's what I thought. And then she just stood there silently while you three held me down and my wife knelt in front of the other guy. But Mary didn't do anything. It was us. I glanced at Mary and Allison, who avoided my gaze and stared at the table. It seemed this conversation didn't unfold as they had hoped. Answer me, Paul. You walk into a bar and spot your buddy Brian's wife in the far corner, on her knees in front of another guy. What do? You look. Do you call Brian and hope he arrives in time? Do you step in to stop her? Now imagine you're at the bar and you spot Brian in the same position. What do? Are you calling Allison? The thing is, I already know the answers. If it's Brian's wife, you intervene and inform Brian. If Brian's the one in the situation, you probably stay put and maybe even join in. Allison won't hear about it from you because Brian is your friend and Allison is your friend's wife. And what about you, Brian? Do you think I'm exaggerating? Brian remained silent. You see, the issue here is that Katie is your friend, not me. If Katie were to attack me, you wouldn't care because I'm just your friend's husband. I'm not your friend. If I hadn't walked into this room, none of you would have said a word to me. You'd all be thinking, all right, the ice is broken. Next time, I'll be the one making a bet with her. I glanced at Katie. When did you lose respect for me? What do you mean, honey? I respect you more than anyone else I've ever known. When did I first tell you that this was acceptable? Well, I never claimed it was, she replied softly. How many times did this occur before last week? What? Never? Why are you so surprised by this question? Why should I trust you? If I hadn't witnessed it, would you have informed me? Would you wait until we got home and casually mention, hey, honey, something odd happened at the card game tonight? That's the issue, Katie. You were ready to jeopardize our marriage, but not your cherished spot in the poker group. I came second to these idiots. I can't reconcile with that. I turned to Brian and Paul. You guys knew Katie would prioritize her damn poker spot over her marriage, and you encouraged her instead of reasoning with her. I addressed Brian and Paul, then turned to them. What would you do if you had to watch your wives with another man? They smirked and exchanged glances before facing me. Is she getting paid for this? Inquired Paul. Mary's jaw dropped. Not to be outdone, Brian chimed in. Will she gain any new skills? I simply grinned. So, when's the next poker game? They murmured to each other for a while. Then Brian asked, Are you interested? No, I replied. When's the next poker game? Catherine, I'm baffled why you're saying you won't return, yet you keep inquiring about the next gathering. Okay, I've had it. Let me lay it out. I retrieved my gym bag and emptied all the envelopes. Tonight, I was about to shatter a couple of marriages, but you know what? I believe they're already on the rocks. I stowed the envelopes back and replaced the bag. Catherine, you tore my heart out and actually enlisted your friends to restrain me while you did it. And you still don't see any wrongdoing? You not only betrayed me, but also shamelessly humiliated me. Clearly, your poker group status means more to you than I do. But the worst part, Catherine, is that these people aren't your friends. Real friends wouldn't subject you to this or allow you to inflict this on yourself. Katie started to interject. No, darling, you mean everything. Take it easy, Catherine. It's my turn now. You didn't even apologize. All you did was rationalize why you should settle your debts. You kept insisting we needed to move past this, yet you never acknowledged any wrongdoing. Even after all this, you still plan to attend poker nights. If you're willing to gamble carnal favors while I'm present, what would you wager when I'm not? Am I supposed to raise another person's child because you lost a bet and someone else impregnated you? We're through. You have a gambling issue. Seek help. I'll consult a lawyer on Monday. If you want your own attorney, go ahead. As far as I'm concerned, you can have almost everything, including your misguided friends. What an idiot you are, Brian remarked. Screw you, Brian, Allison retorted, surprising everyone. He's right about everything. You guys are wrecking his marriage to Katie for your own entertainment. He was on the verge of exposing you, claiming I slept with him, and I don't know why he didn't. You know I did. Henry, can I catch a ride with you? Another awkward silence lingered for about 10 seconds before Mary spoke up. You know what, Paul? I've had it, Mary asserted. I'm tired of carrying all the weight in this relationship. Henry's spot on. You hardly even sit by my side. Back before all this mess, Henry looked up to her. I always wished you'd treat me the way he treated her. It's the first time I've seen them not sitting together, not touching, not holding hands. It really infuriates me that you facilitated all this, Henry, she continued. Last Saturday, when it all went down, I was just as stunned as you were. I honestly thought it was some sick joke because I believe she loved you deeply. I'm truly sorry I didn't speak up then, but perhaps it's better for you to find out now, especially since you don't have children. Can I hitch a ride with you? We departed the house with Katie sobbing uncontrollably, Larry and Sandy bickering over the swing, and Paul and Brian exchanging threats of, "If you don't come home today, don't bother coming back at all." Both girls stormed out, flipping the bird. I dropped off Allison and Mary at Allison's parents' house and returned to my motel. I polished off the remaining hard drinks in the room and devoured the last of the junk food. I eventually drifted off around midnight. The divorce proceeded smoothly. We sold the house and she stashed all the furniture in storage. I got everything I desired from a surprisingly modest house. Allison and Mary split from their spouses, and the three of us maintained a friends with benefits arrangement. Katie has been silent. Frankly, I was let down. I expected her to put up more of a fight, maybe push for counseling. Clearly, marriage meant less to her than it did to me. While I never developed romantic feelings for Mary or Allison individually, the three of us grew very close. A year after the infamous incident, I found myself in the bar Katya and I used to frequent for special occasions. The divorce had been finalized 4 months prior. As I sat there nursing my beer and missing Katya, I sensed someone behind me. I kept my gaze fixed on the wall, hoping they'd leave. I really wasn't in the mood to chat and wished they'd take the hint. "Mind if I join you?" I kept my head down, focusing on my drink. "Sure, go ahead, have a seat." "A nice guy like you, I'm surprised you're here by yourself." "Well, I usually hang out with 2 wonderful friends, but they're on a double date." "Funny you mention friends. Turns out mine weren't as great as I thought. I happened upon a couple of girls who mentioned there'd be a handsome, kind-hearted guy flying solo at this bar. Figured I'd come introduce myself. I'm Katie." I chuckled and played along. "Pleasure to meet you, Katie. I'm Henry." "Why are you here alone? Celebrating something?" "No, nothing to celebrate. I'm a relationship failure. Couldn't prevent my wife from cheating, so we divorced. My 2 closest friends are with other people. And you?" "Well, maybe I'm a failure too. Had the world's best boyfriend, loved me deeply, but I hurt him terribly. Cheated, and he divorced me. Did he do what was best for him or for me? Let's start with him." "Not sure. You'd have to ask him. People say he's unhappy all the time." "And you?" "It's been tough. His divorce plunged me into the darkest period of my life. Forced me to examine myself closely. Didn't like what I found. Started dependency counseling then and have kept at it since. My husband saw it coming, tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. In that sense, divorce was probably inevitable. My dependency would have eventually eroded his love for me. I never stopped loving you, Kat. Couldn't." "I know, Henry. I get it. First, it's nice to hear you call me Katie or Kat again, not Catherine. I came to explain my actions and assure you it's not your fault. I know you know this, but I needed to say it. That poker night, I was sure I'd win. When I didn't, I paid up. Didn't even see it as cheating. Like a handshake. I worried they might ostracize me from the group. I never viewed it as a gamble on our marriage since I never imagined you'd leave. It never crossed my mind. I anticipated your anger, followed by forgiveness, seeing it as my duty. I believed you'd understand my need to honor my word. Frankly, I didn't think it was a big deal. But now I realize it's the most despicable, repulsive thing I've ever done to someone. Back then, I couldn't comprehend your seemingly irrational behavior. During therapy, when I recounted the fight and how you insisted I document it, the doctor praised your approach, calling you a genius. She expressed surprise at the endurance of our marriage. She also clarified why you were so fixated on the next poker night. Just so you're aware, there haven't been any more poker nights. I haven't touched a deck of cards since that evening, and I never will again. I haven't communicated with any of those guys since a couple of weeks after our argument. How's Sandy holding up? She's doing okay. She and Larry ended up divorcing. Turns out he was a terrible idiot, and she felt too embarrassed to speak up. Eventually, she decided to leave him. Now she's dating a coworker. Henry, you were spot on about everything. I prioritized this foolish poker group over everything else. I loved you wholeheartedly, and I knew you felt the same. I was confident you'd understand and be okay with it. If these people were genuine friends, things wouldn't have spiraled like this. I couldn't resist the pull of being part of that group. Allowing that idiot Mark to do what he did makes me sick with myself. Without your actions, I shudder to think how those games would have evolved. I'm deeply sorry for all the pain I caused you. I genuinely wish you a wonderful life. You deserve it. I'd genuinely like to maintain a friendship with you, but I understand if you're not up for it. I'll leave now before I start blubbering like a child. Give me a call." Katie rose and headed toward the door. "Hey, Kat," I called after her. She paused but didn't turn back. "Yes, Henry?" Her shoulders trembled with tears. "Have you eaten dinner yet?" "No, Henry, not yet," she replied, still facing away. I rose, approached her, wrapped my arm around her shoulders, guided her head to my shoulder, and led her to the door. "Let's go grab a proper dinner." Katie and I rekindled our relationship, and a few months later we moved back in together. 9 months after that, we remarried at the courthouse, opting to keep the same anniversary date. True to her word, Katie gave up gambling entirely, even abstaining from joking bets. While some might say once a cheater, always a cheater, I don't believe that applies to Katie. I see her actions through the lens of her dependency, understanding that it led her to behavior she wouldn't otherwise engage in. Her motives weren't to shame me or seek another partner. She was battling her dependency. The guys from the poker group remained friends, except for Terry, who distanced himself. As for Mark, I never heard from him again. It seems he chose to leave town to avoid further discussion on the matter. Katie and I maintain friendships with Sandy, Allison, and Mary. Sandy has also quit playing poker. They've all agreed to be godmothers to our son. Growing up in a small town outside St. Louis, life was shaped by the rhythm of my family's business, a bustling bar and a restaurant that brought in all types of people. My siblings and I learned early on that running such an establishment required not just hard work, but a keen sense of discretion. And it was a world where secrets hid in plain sight, where laughter and whispers mingled in the air. This upbringing molded me, sharpening my instincts and shaping the way I viewed trust and loyalty, especially in relationships. Years passed, and I carved my own path away from the bar, building a career and a family with Vicky, a woman who shared my values and had her own unyielding ambition. We built a life rooted in shared experiences and mutual respect. However, my childhood memories, filled with tales of infidelity and hidden truths, occasionally surfaced, coloring the way I saw the world and those around me. The evening began like any other Friday night. I arrived home later than usual, only to find that my wife, Victoria, hadn't returned yet. I wasn't thrilled that she'd gone out for drinks with friends after work, but what choice did I have? Every marriage needs space and independence. Vicky, however, was always considerate, keeping me informed about her plans, where they were going, and making sure she didn't stay out too late. Most evenings she would be back by 8 o'clock, well within reason. This afternoon, during a work review, I got a text from Vicky. "The 4 of us are having a drink. I'll be home late, my love." Vicky always valued her reputation. These outings happened no more than every 3 to 4 weeks, but why did it bother me so much? That's a longer story for another time. To put it simply, I have trust issues, not just with women, but with anyone who spends time at bars without their spouse or frequently travels for work. Vicky did both, but the traveling was the hardest for me to deal with. You might be wondering why I have these issues and how they shape my view of Vicky. Here's a story that might explain it. I literally grew up in a bar. My parents owned and ran the most popular bar in our small town outside St. Louis, Missouri. They also had an upscale French restaurant in the same building. People from all over came for dinner and then moved next door to dance the night away. I saw it all, the laughter, dancing, and quiet talks over drinks that sometimes turned into arguments or romantic whispers. My parents were strict about certain things. From a young age, they made sure I knew the importance of discretion and prudence. The summer I turned 16, they decided it was time for me to start learning the family business. My older brother and sister had started working there when they turned 16. By the time I began, my brother was 21, with a degree in hotel and restaurant management, and ran the bar. My sister, nearly 19, had just started college. But at 16, I wasn't allowed to work in the bar. I started waiting tables in the restaurant. I didn't like it. Like most teenagers, I wanted to spend time with friends, have fun, and work as little as possible while making good money. I dreamed of working somewhere I could flirt with young, pretty girls. I'd been waiting tables for about 3 weeks when things began to change. The restaurant and bar attracted a mix of people, businessmen, young couples, and older folks out for a nostalgic night. One evening, I saw something that opened my eyes. "Oh my God," I whispered, standing in the doorway between the restaurant and the bar. My eyes darted from table to table, taking in sights I never imagined. Women in little black dresses, men leaning in to share whispers. My teenage heart raced at scenes almost too much to process. I was so distracted that my parents had to call me back to the restaurant multiple times. I remember one night when my sister Sarah caught me watching too intently. She walked up to me with a frown. "Donnie, you better get back to work and ignore what you see. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble." I half smiled and said, "But little sister, that's Mrs. Horton with a man. She's not even wearing underwear. Do you think Mr. Horton knows? I can't wait to tell the guys. This is unbelievable." Sarah's eyes widened in shock as she glanced over her shoulder and muttered, "Oh, crap." Just then, I felt my father's large hand on my shoulder. He squeezed hard and said, "Don, come with me, now." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. He walked through the dining room, past the waiter's station, and into his office. I followed slowly, my stomach twisting with nerves. When I entered, my father pointed to the chair in front of his desk. "Close the door and sit down." I did, my pulse quickening. I thought, this is going to be really bad. My father's expression was unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Don, I should have talked to you about this before you started working here. But I didn't. I had this conversation with your brother and sister, and it never gets easier." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mrs. Horton is a beautiful woman, isn't she?" His question caught me off guard, and I felt my face flush. I fidgeted in my chair, unsure of how to respond. Before I could, he repeated, "Isn't she?" I nodded slightly and whispered, "Yeah." My dad leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fingers interlaced. He looked tired, his eyes weary. "Listen, Don, this business is our life and how we make a living. It supports our family, keeps a roof over our heads, pays for your brother's college, and will do the same for you and your sister if we don't mess it up." He paused to let the words sink in before continuing. "If you see someone you know come in with their family, greet them by name, chat briefly, and then get back to work. However, if they come in with someone who isn't their spouse, you act as if you didn't see them. You don't acknowledge them, you don't remember them being here, and you certainly don't discuss it with anyone else. Part of working in the food and bar industry means having selective hearing and vision. If a customer does something questionable, we ignore it and don't talk about it outside of this place. That's what they expect from us, and it's why they trust us." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. He fixed me with a serious look. "If I ever find out that you or anyone on staff has gossiped about a customer, they'll be fired immediately. No exceptions. We are known for our discretion. That's what keeps customers coming back. Do you understand, son?" "Yes, sir," I whispered. "Good." My father leaned back in his chair, some tension easing from his shoulders. "Now get back to work and remember what I said." I returned to work that day and continued working at the restaurant throughout high school and college. I never gossiped about customers, but I witnessed more dishonesty than someone my age should. As I got older and started working in the bar, I observed groups of men or women having boys or girls' nights. I watched as married individuals did things that wouldn't pass the test of marital loyalty. I learned. Maybe I learned too much because I became intolerant of those who attended parties and stayed late. I realized that many out-of-towners were just looking for fun and trying to meet locals. It was fine if they were single, but many were married or wore wedding rings. Often they ended up with other married clients. I grew to disrespect and feel disgusted by them, but treated everyone with the same level of politeness and discretion. Ultimately, we wanted a successful business. I noticed that people who came to parties and left early after a drink or two had solid, stable marriages. Those who stayed late often had troubled marriages, and many later divorced. During my freshman year of college, my father hired a new waitress. When I first saw Victoria, I was struck by desire. Over the next 2 years working together, we fell in love. We met each other's families and relatives. We talked and discovered that we were kindred spirits. We laughed at the antics and foolishness of the unfaithful customers we saw. Finally, the Christmas before our college graduation, I proposed to Vicky. By then, we both knew we shared the same values and wanted to be together for life. The only bump in our relationship was our parents' request for a prenuptial agreement. Vicky and I believed it was unnecessary, as we saw ourselves as life partners. My parents had a business, and to my surprise, a significant investment portfolio that they wanted to protect if I inherited it. To my surprise, Vicky's parents had the same concerns. They had considerable wealth and wanted Vicky's share protected in case of a divorce. The agreement they drafted solved these issues. We agreed that anything we owned before marriage or inherited from our maternal relatives would remain ours if we divorced. The agreement also covered pensions, which we would each keep. Only jointly acquired property after marriage would be divided. The agreement even addressed childcare, stating that if we divorced while having minor children, custody would go to the parent who traveled less unless it posed a risk to the children. Graduation day finally came. Vicky graduated with a bachelor's degree in finance and secured a great job at a local brokerage firm. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in construction management and a minor in landscape architecture. After college, I worked for a construction company for 2 years to learn the trade. Neither Vicky nor I were interested in running a restaurant or bar. My parents turned the business into a corporation, and we let my sister and brother manage it. Mom stayed on as the accountant while Dad remained the behind-the-scenes boss. After 2 years, I started my own construction and landscaping company. Since Vicky and I struggled to cover our mortgage and car payments, my parents provided the startup capital through the family corporation. I received a salary to manage the business. It was challenging at first, but Vicky steadily climbed the career ladder. One day, she came home elated. She had been selected for a position in the brokerage firm's compliance department, which ensured that all satellite offices adhered to SEC regulations. The only downside was the job required some travel, usually 3 to 4 days a month. My past made me uneasy about it. Over time, my business grew from handling small remodels to adding rooms, garages, and constructing new buildings with landscaping. I was content and never tried to take the business out of the corporation and make it solely mine. My salary increased each year as the business grew in value and income. I gradually accepted Vicky's travel, though I never felt entirely comfortable. Even though I wasn't thrilled when she went out with friends, it wasn't often, and she was usually home by 8 p.m. Of course, I occasionally traveled and went out for a beer with the construction crews or office staff. It was good management. But I made sure to leave after a couple of beers and was typically home no more than an hour later than usual, unless Vicky joined me. After 3 years of marriage, Vicky and I decided it was time to start a family. Our first child was Patrick, followed by little Suzanne 18 months later. She was tiny, and as she grew, she had me wrapped around her finger. By the time she turned 4, she was a younger version of her mother. When she gets older, she's sure to make your heart stop. As Vicky gained more experience at work, she became known as the go-to person for handling tough office situations. She could identify issues and knew how to help fix them. If she faced resistance, she wasn't afraid to call out the wrongdoing. If that didn't work, she would escalate the issue to headquarters and push harder. Many office managers who crossed paths with her ended up seeking new jobs. Because of this, Vicky's travel increased. Sometimes she was away for up to 2 weeks a month. We both hated it. We discussed it, and she believed she was on track to lead her department within 2 years, which would end the travel and come with a big salary boost. We agreed to push through until then. Due to the economic downturn, my small company had to take on jobs we would have passed on before the housing and stock markets crashed. We had already let go of about half of our staff. We weren't in financial trouble because we avoided major loans and heavy overhead, but we weren't as profitable as before. One small job I took on ended up steering my marriage toward disaster. I wish I'd never taken it. Maybe I'd still be happily married. Maybe not. That Thursday morning, I walked into my office wondering why I even showed up. The night before, I'd stayed late to finish all the paperwork on my desk. Vicky had been out of town all week for compliance inspections and, based on our conversations, wouldn't be home until late Friday evening. I considered heading straight to one of our 3 job sites to spend the day working hands-on and inspecting the progress. As most know, the best way to keep employees alert and ensure quality is for the boss to be on site, ready to step in. I hadn't been at my desk long when my assistant called me. She said, "Don, we have a casual environment here, and I try to treat my staff like family. Mrs. Sloan is here to discuss building a deck and landscaping her backyard. Do you have time to see her?" I thought, a nice little porch and some plants. I decided to take the meeting. A small job could still keep some of my guys employed and help their families. When Mrs. Sloan walked in, I was stunned. I could barely speak. She looked so much like Mrs. Horton, the first woman I'd ever been infatuated with, that it caught me off guard. I finally collected myself, stood up, and greeted her. "Mrs. Sloan, nice to meet you. I'm Don Patterson." She said, "You're here to build porches?" "That's right," I replied. "Please, have a seat so we can discuss your plans. I'm sorry, but you remind me of someone I knew when I was younger. It felt like she just walked in the room. Please forgive me. Jasmine laughed, a light and familiar sound. Don, it's me, Jasmine. Jasmine Horton. She must have noticed my confusion because she added, You know, Danita and Alfred Horton's daughter. We used to come to your family's restaurant all the time. I blinked in surprise. Oh my God, I'm sorry. You were younger back then and you've changed so much. Jasmine's laugh tinkled again. Well, I guess we've all changed. I was only 10 when my parents divorced, and after that, Mom and I couldn't afford to visit your place anymore. With a sigh, Jasmine continued. Anyway, my husband and I just bought a house near where we used to live. He said we could build a porch and maybe add a jacuzzi. If the price is right, we'd like to move forward. When I heard you had a construction business, I wanted to ask you first before anyone else. We spent the rest of the morning reminiscing and discussing her and her husband Stephen's plans. Once we had a rough outline of what they wanted, I told her I'd need to visit the property and take measurements to give an accurate quote. She replied, No problem, Don. I'm free all day, so just let me know when you'd like to come. I said, How about I come by at 1 o'clock this afternoon? I need to check in at my job sites and grab some lunch first, but then I'll have the rest of the day to take measurements and prepare an estimate. Does that work for you? Jasmine left, and I stepped out of my office to tell my secretary, Laura, I'll be out for the rest of the day. I'm heading to the job sites, grabbing lunch, and then going to Mrs. Sloane's to assess her project. Lock up when you leave and call my cell if you need anything. Everything was going smoothly at work, but I ended up staying longer than planned to meet with one of the property owners, which made me late for lunch. I arrived at Sloane's around 1:30. Jasmine greeted me at the door, and the first thing I did was apologize for my tardiness. Mrs. Sloane, I'm sorry for being late. I met with a property owner and waited for him. I tried to call, but only got your answering machine. Jasmine laughed softly. I've told you, just call me Jasmine. Sorry I missed your call earlier. I was cleaning the pool when I got home and left my cordless phone inside. But no worries, you're here now. Would you like something to drink, or should we head out to look at the yard? I smiled and shook my head. I'm fine, Jasmine. Let's just go check out your backyard. After taking all the measurements, I said, It's easy to estimate most of this, but since you don't have a hot tub yet, you'll need to buy one before I can give you a full quote. I need its dimensions to order the necessary materials. Jasmine looked surprised and said, Oh, I thought you provide the hot tub too. I don't know much about them. Can't you just include it in the project? I chuckled and said, Yes, Jasmine, I can do that. But we don't sell them, so I'll need to buy it elsewhere. To do that, I need to know the size you want. Will it be built-in or standalone? And will it run on 210 or 110 volts? Jasmine seemed flustered, reminding me of how she'd get upset over small things when she was younger. Finally, I said, Why don't we discuss it a bit? And you could call your husband or talk to him tonight. I can wait to finalize this until you've decided on the hot tub. Now Jasmine seemed genuinely anxious. Almost shaking, she said, Oh, no, I can't call him. He told me to handle this, and I plan to. He's on a business trip in Denver, so I won't see him until the weekend. Let's figure this out now. I asked her more about how they'd use the hot tub and learned they rarely had guests. Mostly she used the pool and backyard, sometimes with 1 or 2 friends. Once I had enough information, we went to my supplier, and Jasmine picked out a small 5-person hot tub. I took the measurements, and we returned to her house. I asked if there was a place where I could connect to the internet to access my office system. Some of my budget items changed on Thursdays, and I wanted up-to-date prices before preparing the quote. Jasmine smiled and said, Of course, Don. Come into the office. Steve works as a manufacturer's rep for Savin Business Systems, so he has a great home office for when he's not traveling. You can connect your laptop to our network or use our desktop. I stepped into the office and was impressed. It was set up like a professional business space, with a desk to the left of the door, windows overlooking the backyard, 2 leather chairs in front of the desk, and a bookshelf on the opposite wall. Jasmine walked behind the desk and pulled out a chair for me. She smiled and said, You can sit here while you work. Let me know if you need anything. Thank you, I said as I walked to the desk. I set my laptop down and sat. Jasmine handed me a DSL cable to connect. When I reached for it, my eyes caught a photograph. I paused, hand hovering, then pulled back and stared at it before picking it up. Jasmine noticed my reaction and looked puzzled as she held out the cable. Her eyes moved between my face and the photo I was gripping tightly. Is something wrong? She asked, concern crossing her face. That's my husband, my pride and joy. I keep telling him to replace that picture with one of him and his Chevelle, but he won't. I'm tired of seeing his ex-girlfriend every time I use the desk. Why are you looking at me like that? What's the matter? I carefully placed the photo back on the desk and stepped away. Jasmine, did you say your husband was in Denver? I asked, my voice strained. Her expression shifted to surprise. Yes, I did. Why do you ask? My wife is also in Denver and has been all week. Jasmine, did Stephen know you were getting an estimate from me or mention me at all? No, she replied, frowning. But what does that matter? He just told me to get a quote for the deck and hot tub as long as it didn't exceed $20,000. Why are you asking? I took a deep breath, meeting her eyes. Jasmine, the woman in this photo with Steve is my wife. Jasmine's eyes widened as she processed the information. Wow, that's strange. So, you married Steve's ex-girlfriend? We've only been married for 18 months. When did you get married? A knot formed in my stomach as I looked at Jasmine. Vicky and I have been married for 9 years. This photo can't be more than 2 years old. I recognize the necklace I bought her for Christmas just over 2 years ago. She also bought that outfit specifically for our summer vacation the following year. Jasmine hesitated, then said, If what you're suggesting is true, Dawn, I'm so sorry. But why does her being in Denver worry you? Jasmine, I continued, you mentioned you've been married for 18 months. Based on what Vicky's wearing in that photo, I think it was taken right around when you and Steve got married. When did he frame it? And what did he tell you about it? It can't be, Jasmine responded, her voice breaking. The photo was taken the day he won first place at the Big State Chevrolet car show. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes as she sank into one of the leather chairs in front of the desk. She continued quietly, That was 3 weeks before we got married. I never suspected anything. He told me it was an old picture, but he's holding the first place trophy. Damn him. Wait a minute, Jasmine, I said, trying to steady my thoughts. Let's think this through carefully. I saw plenty of situations like this when I worked in my family's restaurant. I learned to stay quiet because cheaters always get exposed eventually. Yes, this looks suspicious, but all we know for sure is that Steve and Vicky are in front of his car, hugging. The photo appears to be about 18 months to 2 years old. You're younger than us, so I doubt Steve could be one of Vicky's ex-boyfriends, but it's not impossible. Vicky and I started dating when we were 18 while working at my dad's restaurant. I know the names of most of her past crushes, just like you probably know Steve's. How old is he, by the way? He's 29 and I'm 27, Jasmine said. I nodded slowly. That's possible since Vicky isn't quite 31. I don't know what to make of this. Damn. What do we do now? If we confront them, they'll just deny it, whether it's something from the past or happening now. If they're involved and we confront them, they might become more secretive or even run away together. I feel like I need to ask, but until today, I trusted Vicky completely. I'm at a loss. We talked more and came up with what we thought was a reasonable plan. We decided not to mention what we had discovered that day. Jasmine wouldn't tell Steve about our conversation, and we would hire a private investigator to look into both Vicky and Steve. The next day, we spoke to the security company we used for our construction sites, and they referred us to an investigative agency they worked with. We talked to their staff and signed a contract for their services. We each wrote a check for our share of the advance. Jasmine used a shortened name on her check so that if Steve asked, she could say it was a deposit for the project. I used my business account, which Vicky never checked, so I was in the clear. I'd just cover any business expenses later. 3 weeks later, Jasmine and I met with the investigator. He said, Dawn, Jasmine, I'm happy to report that we couldn't find any evidence suggesting your spouses are seeing each other or even know each other. We monitored them every afternoon and after work, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. The only unusual thing was last Friday when Mrs. Patterson and some co-workers went out in St. Louis, visiting several bars and dancing with different men. Vicky danced with Steve once, but it was innocent. They kept a decent distance, and neither's hands wandered. There was no kissing or anything inappropriate, and they didn't speak to each other after the dance. I exhaled deeply and leaned back in my chair, glancing from the investigator to Jasmine. A nagging thought began to take root, that this entire situation might be fueled by the deep-seated distrust I had developed from years of working in the family business. I'd gone so far as to check phone records and install cameras and voice recorders in our house, as well as in Vicky's car and purse. Every search came up clean. Finally, I spoke. I guess this was just paranoia on my part. I'm relieved, but I feel ashamed for doubting them. Let's end this. Wait a second. Jasmine said, her tone serious. "Didn't you mention that Steve is going to San Antonio next week?" She hesitated, as if piecing something together. "Yes, but why does that matter?" I leaned forward, a new sense of urgency creeping in. "Oh, we won't need to monitor anyone next week, right? That's exactly when we should be paying attention. Vicky told me 2 weeks ago that she has a compliance check next week. I can't remember exactly where, but I think she said Austin. Depending on their schedules, they could be within an hour of each other. We've already confirmed there's nothing suspicious here at home, so let's focus on monitoring this trip. If nothing turns up, I'll admit it was all in my head. It's reasonable to think that if they were just old friends, she might have posed for a photo with his trophy." Throughout the investigation and uncertainty, Jasmine and I saw no change in how Vicky or Steve treated us. Their behavior was exactly as it had always been. I thought long and hard, but couldn't identify any shift in Vicky's actions or attitude since we began dating or even in the early years of our marriage. She treated me as if I were the only man in her life. She still initiated closeness, responded to me warmly, and was as loving and attentive as ever. The Friday night before Vicky's upcoming trip, we went out for a date. Later, as we lay in bed, I turned to her and asked, "Do you remember when we worked at my dad's restaurant and used to laugh at all the cheaters and the ridiculous things people did?" I thought I noticed a brief tension in her body, but it was fleeting. She smiled and turned to face me. "Yes, some of those people were really unbelievable. Sometimes when I see similar behavior at work, I think back to those days and wonder how people can be so foolish." "Why do you ask?" "A guy at work thinks his wife is cheating," I said. "He hasn't found any proof, though. When he shared his worries with me, I thought back to those times and told him to stay calm. I suggested he stay observant because cheaters eventually expose themselves. I also mentioned that taking the time to figure things out is better for the children, since divorce always affects them." Vicky's expression turned somber as she responded, "Why do you assume a marriage has to end in divorce? Maybe the wife really loves her husband and the affair means nothing to her. Maybe she doesn't want a divorce at all." "No, Vicky," I said. "He's like me. He spent time in bars and has the same low tolerance for infidelity that we do. I can't see him accepting a long-term affair, just as we wouldn't. Maybe he'd forgive a one-time mistake, but never something ongoing." Vicky tensed again when I said I wouldn't accept a long-term affair. But she smiled, turned to me, kissed me softly, and said, "I'm glad you're still the man I married. We know how devastating affairs can be. If he needs help, try to talk sense into him, and maybe we can both help him get through it. Good night, sweetheart." We settled in bed, but from all the tossing and turning, it was clear neither of us fell asleep quickly. The next week was hard for me. I called the investigators twice, but all they said was, "Our team is monitoring both of them, and we'll provide a report by next Monday." Finally, Monday came, and Jasmine and I met at the investigator's office. As we sat down, we felt like bad news was coming. The investigator leaned back and said, "You know, when you asked us to follow your spouses last week, I almost said it would be a waste of money. This turned out to be one of the trickiest infidelity cases we've ever seen. But you were right. Steve and Vicky are having an affair. We have photos and recorded conversations to prove it. I'm honestly surprised. If we'd only followed them locally, we wouldn't have found out. Based on the recordings, they meet only 3 or 4 times a year, far from here. They act as if it's coincidental when they're in the same city and work hard to appear as just acquaintances. But what we uncovered showed they're skilled at hiding it. They traveled to 2 different cities, stayed in different hotels, and met at a 3rd hotel without sharing a room. They booked adjoining rooms at different times, with Steve paying cash for his and Vicky checking in as Angela Foster with a government ID under that name. Steve checked in as Stephen Allen, also using a government ID. They stayed only from Tuesday to Thursday and only saw each other on those days. I leaned back, processing everything. "Foster. Vicky's maiden name is Victoria Angela Foster." Jasmine whispered, "Allen is Steve's middle name." "Well," I said, "I guess that's it, except for the tears. I'll contact a divorce attorney as soon as possible." Jasmine started to respond, but the investigator cut in. "Hold on. That's not everything. Usually I wouldn't mention this, but something doesn't add up. I know they were intimate, but this doesn't feel like a typical affair. It seems more like some elaborate game. We have hours of conversations on tape, and most are innocent. There were only 2 intimate moments the whole week, and their pillow talk was odd. Here, let me play a recording so you can see what I mean." When the investigator played the specific part of the tape, we heard Vicky speaking. She said, "You know, Steve, I'm starting to think we need to end this. We've been doing this for 6 years and had our fun. We've proven that we're the exception to the rule. Smart cheaters. I'm sure you'd agree that sex between us isn't nearly as good as with our spouses. Plus, something Don said Friday night is bothering me." We talked in bed, and he reminded me of what we learned working at his parents' restaurant, that all cheaters eventually get caught. No one thinks through all the possibilities. At some point, every cheater either gets overconfident or makes a minor mistake that exposes them. I'm still uneasy about Denver. It was the first time we were in the same city, and I think it was a mistake. We shouldn't have deviated from the plan. We should only meet in different cities, close enough to rendezvous in the middle like we do here. Sure, it's a hassle to book 2 rooms and pay for an unused one, but we've proven our point. We're smart cheaters, and if you play it smart, you can cheat and win. I don't want to do anything that could make me lose Don. I love him more than anything. He's the best man I've ever known. Honestly, after our first couple of encounters, the real thrill for me was in the planning and scheming. The logistics, booking rooms, and coordinating details became more enjoyable than solving a puzzle or Sudoku. Zex just dulls the excitement. Don't deny it. I know you feel the same way. You even told me in Denver that you always left unsatisfied. The investigator paused the tape and looked at us. That's not all, but this part of the conversation was the most puzzling. I can't quite make sense of it. I started laughing, surprising both Jasmine and the investigator. Regaining my composure, I said, "I'm sorry, it's not funny. I'm furious. But I need to explain something. A few years back, a couple we were friends with divorced after the wife was caught cheating. She had been doing it for almost 4 years and was exposed by a simple mistake. The night we found out, Vicky and I were with friends, and we ended up discussing infidelity and how cheaters often make foolish decisions. We remembered what my father used to say when we worked at his restaurant and what we witnessed there. Vicky argued that anyone could cheat successfully if they were smart and kept it controlled. I disagreed, saying no one could cheat without eventually being caught. It might take years, but it would happen. I said even a minor innocent slip could expose it. We both stuck to our points, but for weeks afterward, Vicky would mention smart cheaters winning. I believe her affair with Steve began around that argument. Vicky has always taken pride in her intelligence, and I think I unknowingly pushed the wrong button. She wanted to prove she could do it and get away with it. She probably could have if she had stopped earlier. But now, no, she won't get away with it. Jasmine and I were now waiting to meet with a divorce attorney. Since sharing the cost of the investigator had worked well, we decided to share the lawyer's fees too. When we were called into the office, the lawyer looked surprised. "Mr. Patterson." "And is this Mrs. Patterson?" I smirked and said, "No, sir, I'm Don Patterson, and this is Jasmine Sloan. We found out her husband and my wife were cheating on us, so we split the cost of the investigator. Now we're hoping to split your fee as well." Attorney George Spaulding smiled and gestured for us to sit. "Of course. Let's see if we can work something out. Please, have a seat." I handed him a copy of the investigator's report and photos. Before he could review them, I said, "I don't think my case will be too complex. I also brought a list of everything Vicky and I own and how and when we acquired it. Here's a copy of our prenuptial agreement, which details property division and child custody. All I want is a divorce due to infidelity and a settlement per the agreement. Jasmine's case might be more complicated." I sat back and waited as he reviewed the documents. After finishing my paperwork, Jasmine provided hers, which was similar except she didn't have a prenuptial agreement. The lawyer outlined the divorce process, timelines, and his fees. He also discussed what Jasmine might want from her divorce. Finally, he said, "I think that's enough for now. I'll review everything, including the investigator's report. If I have questions, I'll reach out. Otherwise, I'll prepare the documents and move forward. Would you like me to serve the papers directly or contact you first?" Jasmine and I agreed we wanted a call when the documents were ready to be served. We left the attorney's office and went back to our routines, deciding to stay in touch. 2 days later, George Spaulding called. After some small talk, George said, "Don, I've reviewed everything you gave me, and I have to tell you, this is the strangest case I've ever seen. I even had 2 partners look at it, and they agree. Yes, there was infidelity, but it's clear that your wife loves you. Honestly, it doesn't even seem like a traditional affair. It feels more like a game where they had to include Zex to play. Don, are you sure you want to move forward with this? I mean, you said you had an almost perfect marriage. No fights, a good bed life, mutual love, and respect. If you don't mind me saying so, it's almost like you were part of this game too. Now, the only option left is divorce. Could you talk to Vicky and move past it? You know she told Steve that they needed to end it, and that it was just a game for her. I sat and thought for a moment before responding. No, George. I've asked myself that question a lot. At one point, I thought I could move on. If it had been just a game, without Zex, and only an emotional or pretend affair, I might have been able to ignore it. Maybe Vicky was angry that I mocked her belief that she could cheat smartly and not get caught. She couldn't let my statement go that all cheaters are eventually exposed. If she hadn't crossed the line and slept with Steve, I might have looked past it. But it's been 6 years. Even if the Zex wasn't fulfilling for them, it was still infidelity, and she has to face the consequences. George sighed. Well, it's your life. I hate doing this, but I have the documents ready. When do you want her served? I smiled slightly. George, she and Steve are on the East Coast this week. She's supposed to return late Friday afternoon. Can we serve her at her office on Friday? Her flight lands around noon, so she should be back at her office by 3:30 or 4. I'd like her served then, along with the recording I have. It's the clip where she talks to Steve about breaking things off. You're welcome to listen, but at the end, I say they lost. Like I said, cheaters always get caught. On Friday morning, I gathered my team in the office before they left for their work sites. I informed them that Vicky and I were getting a divorce and explained the reasons behind it. I instructed them not to take any orders from her or share any details about the business or my personal life. Once they left, my secretary Laura stayed behind. Oh, Don, I'm so sorry, she said. I can't believe Vicky would do this. I remember how much she hated cheaters. Laura gave a sad chuckle. Some of the things she said when we'd see someone we knew acting that way, I never would have guessed. At 4:10 that afternoon, George called to confirm that the documents had been served. By 4:30, the call I had been dreading came. Vicky's name flashed on the caller ID. I answered, "Hello, Vicky." I heard her crying, and then her voice, shaky and broken, said, "Don, can't we stop this? You know I love you with all my heart. I see now how stupid I was, but you made me so angry that night with your arrogant lecture about how smart cheaters never get away with it. For the first year, it was just planning and meeting to prove we could. I know you heard me tell Steve I didn't love him and that the Zex wasn't even good. We were going to stop. Please don't do this. I still can't believe you found out after all these years. I need to know how you did it. Vicky, this isn't on me. You did this," I said, my voice steady. "Now I have to end it. I thought we were on the same page about cheating. I thought we agreed it was unacceptable and that cheaters would always face the consequences. I can't understand how you justified this to yourself." I decided to tell Vicky how I discovered her affair. "Vicky," I began, "I wasn't going to tell you this, but now I think I should. You were right. Going to Denver was a mistake. The Thursday before you came back, Jasmine Sloan visited the office to discuss building a deck and landscaping her yard. She let me use Steve's office, and while I was there, I saw a picture of you with him and his trophy from the State Classic Chevrolet show. Jasmine mentioned that you were one of Steve's old girlfriends. At first, I almost believed her until I noticed that in the photo, you looked exactly like you do now, not years ago. And you were wearing the jewelry and clothes I bought for you about 2 years ago. I almost set my doubts aside, thinking that maybe you dated him before we met and had just run into him at the car show," I added. But then, after more conversations with Jasmine, I found out that you and Steve were both in Denver that week. We hired an investigator and tracked you for a month. Other than one dance at a party with your friends, there was no contact between you two. We were about to dismiss everything, thinking the photo was just a coincidence. But by then, Jasmine and I were already sharing a lot of details. I remembered her mentioning that Steve would be in San Antonio the same weekend you said you'd be in Austin. So we decided to follow you. If we found nothing, we would have let it go. But we did find something, didn't we? I heard Vicky's quiet sobs before she finally spoke. "Don, I love you so much. I don't want to lose you. Can you forgive me just this once?" I sighed heavily. "No, I can't. Not now. Maybe if it hadn't gone so far. But I can't move past the fact that you slept with him and how long it went on." "Don, don't you see?" Vicky pleaded. "It wasn't serious. It was like a game. We only had sex because we were away and both wanted an outlet. We used each other to relieve frustration. We never said we loved each other. It was just about the game and finding some relief." "Vicky, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you did it. You planned it, met up with Steve, and made a fool out of me. I'm sure it started at one of those parties, didn't it? Vicky sighed deeply. Yes, it did. We were chatting when he invited me to dance. The girls and I had been talking about a couple we knew who had an affair and got caught. I mentioned that there's no such thing as a smart traitor. While we were dancing, I told Steve about that, and he said, I bet we could beat that. I travel a lot. If I found someone who did too, we could meet far from home and never get caught. We danced some more, and then we decided to test it. He was a manufacturer's rep. I was conducting compliance reviews. We figured out we'd be in the same place in a few weeks and planned to meet. We developed a secret, non-committal arrangement, she continued. We agreed not to call each other at home or on our personal phones. We used burner phones and work calls just to schedule meetings. I even got a new credit card that was billed to my parents' address. We thought we covered every trace, except for the photos. I didn't know he kept those. Vicky gave a sad smile. One mistake and the traitor is caught. I'm so sorry, Don. I got caught up in the excitement. I love you. There was a click as she hung up, and I realized tears were streaming down my face. I sat back, lost in thought. When Laura said goodnight, my next memory was darkness outside. Both sets of parents tried to stop me from divorcing Vicky, with her parents' plea being the most heartfelt. One Saturday, they visited to see the kids, and we sat by the pool. Vicky's mother turned to me, her expression full of concern. Don, we know she messed up badly. That first night, she came to our house hysterical, saying she'd ruined everything. Eventually, she told us everything and showed us the evidence. I met her eyes as she continued. Don, if her father had done what she did, I would have left him too. But can't you at least try to forgive her? I see how much she loves you in the way she looks at you and talks about you. Her problem is always needing to prove she's the smartest. Did you ever consider that maybe you pushed her into this? She told me about the argument you two had before she decided to prove she could have an affair without getting caught. I took a deep breath and responded, Yes, Mona. I have thought about my role in all of this. I told her once that if she'd met him but hadn't slept with him, I might have been able to forgive it. But she did sleep with him. We both admitted to being cheaters before we got married, and she was the one who insisted on including infidelity clauses in our prenup. And then she did this. It breaks my heart, but I can't just move past it. The divorce was finalized, and I felt relieved that we had a prenup. We divided our investments and the house, which I kept by allowing Vicky to take her share from our investments. My business was safeguarded as it was family registered, so Vicky received nothing from it. Despite everything, I remained civil to Vicky and never restricted her access to the kids, though the trust between us was irreparably broken. One evening, I took the kids out to dinner when I noticed Jasmine walking in, looking hesitant. The hostess approached her, and I stood up to meet them. Jasmine, great to see you, I said with a smile. If you're alone, why not join us? It's just me and the kids. She smiled, a hint of relief on her face, and hugged me, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. Thank you. I'd love to. It's been a bit lonely since... I introduced her to my children, and shortly after, my father came over with a curious look. Don, who's this lovely lady? He asked. Dad, this is Jasmine Sloan. Her husband's family used to visit when I was a kid, I replied. Mr. Patterson's face brightened with recognition. Ah, I remember now. You look so much like your mother. How are your parents doing? They're doing well. Dad moved to Kansas City after the divorce, and I visit Mom a couple of times a month, Jasmine said. Good to hear, my father said warmly. Hope to see you around more often. After ordering, I apologized for not staying in touch. Summer is my busiest time, but that's just an excuse. I'm sorry. Don't worry, Jasmine said. I didn't call either. I'm here to celebrate. Steve finally agreed to the divorce. We sold the house and split everything, though he fought child support. Since he didn't want me working, I won. I'm renting a small place for now, but once I get a job, I'll find better. The kids grew restless, and Jasmine and I ordered another bottle of wine. Eventually, I said, I should get these kids home before they get us kicked out. It's been great talking. Maybe we can do this again. I'd like that, Jasmine said with a smile. The waitress informed us the bill was already paid. That old man, I laughed. He's trying to set us up. I left a tip, stood up, and said, Kids, say goodnight to your grandparents. I helped Jasmine up and offered my hand. May I escort you to your car? Of course, she said, taking my hand. As we waited, I said, I don't want this night to end. Before you came, I was just looking forward to relaxing by the pool with the kids. Jasmine smiled and replied, "Me too, except I don't have a pool or kids." "It's still early," I said, glancing at her. "Would you like to come by after I put them to bed?" She nodded with a warm smile. "I'd love that." Later, once the kids were asleep, I stocked the mini fridge by the pool with drinks and settled down with a Pepsi. Jasmine joined me and took one for herself. I gazed at the pool, exhaled deeply, and turned to her. "You know, I think your mom might have had a role in my divorce. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I was just wondering." Jasmine sat looking at me in shock with what seemed like a tear forming in her eye. I struggled to get up from my chair and sat on the edge of hers. I wiped the tear from her eye and said, "Let me tell you how foolish I was when I was 16. I had only been working at the restaurant for a few weeks when your mother came in with a man I didn't recognize. They had dinner and then went to the bar to drink and dance. I always thought your mom was the most beautiful woman in the world. Until I met you. Anyway, I couldn't stop staring at her. My father not only caught me staring, but also overheard me saying that I would tell my friends about what I saw at school on Monday." I paused. Phew! I still remember the reprimand and lecture I got that night in his office. That talk shaped my thoughts on marital fidelity to this day. You know that later, when Vicky started working with us, she got the same lecture. We often shared stories about what we witnessed at the restaurant and thought we were on the same page with my father's views. Maybe I was too strict about fidelity for my own good. That night with your mother set me on the rigid path I've followed throughout this case. I'm sorry, and before you ask, no, none of my family or staff ever told anyone about your mother. I don't know who did, but your parents didn't divorce until almost a year later. As far as I know, that was the only time she and her companion were at the restaurant." Jasmine looked at me and said, "Well, maybe some good came from all this, or maybe not, depending on how you see it. She married that man, and they stayed together until he died in a car accident a few years ago. I think she may have cheated on him too. I've always heard that once a cheater, always a cheater." Once I was sure Jasmine had calmed down, I returned to my chair and we moved on to lighter topics. I found out she had a degree in accounting and had worked in the field for some time. I smiled, remembering how my mother used to complain about wanting more rest, but couldn't, as she managed the books for the bar and restaurant and supervised the waitstaff. I thought hiring a nanny for Laura might be a good idea. The following Wednesday, I had just come home from work and was drinking a glass of water when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it and was surprised when Jasmine, crying, threw herself into my arms and tried to kiss me. Through her tears, she said, "Thank you. Oh, thank you. Your parents called and offered me a job. I went for an interview and test, and they hired me. I start tomorrow, and they're paying me more than I expected." She began crying again, and I held her close, stroking her hair. Over the next few months, Jasmine and I grew even closer. I started taking the kids out to dinner several nights a week, and timed our visits so Jasmine could join us when she was free. When Christmas arrived, Jasmine was invited to dinner at the Pattersons. Together, we helped prepare the New Year's party at the bar. My father and siblings jokingly complained about how we were always hugging and kissing when they looked for us. By then, we were an established couple. Invitations to one of us naturally included the other. Valentine's Day came, which was another big night for the restaurant and bar, so Jasmine and I were working. After most of the customers had left, I walked into the dining area and said, "Jasmine, could you come to the bar for a moment? The band is on a break, and I need help with something on stage." Jasmine smiled. "Sure, I needed a break anyway." Once on stage, I asked her to hold the microphone stand as I knelt down. I tugged on its base and said, "Hey, can we get a light over here?" Jasmine glanced around for a light source, and one of the spotlights shone on us. I said, "Jasmine." The microphone picked up my voice and echoed through the room. Jasmine looked down and saw me holding out a small black box. At first, she thought it was part of the mic stand. The bright light made it hard to see, so she reached for it, confused. I spoke again. "Jasmine, I'm down here at your feet, asking you, will you marry me? You brought light back into my life, and I'm only happy when I'm with you." As her fingers touched the box, she realized what I was saying. She opened it and found a beautiful ring inside. Her jaw dropped, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Slowly, she took the ring from the box, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knelt and kissed me deeply. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes. I love you with all my heart. I've been hoping for this moment for months." The room erupted with cheers and applause. When Jasmine pulled away, she saw my entire family gathered around. My brother lifted her up and hugged her, and she was passed from person to person, receiving hugs and congratulations. Jasmine planned the wedding for June. Over the months, she gradually moved her things from her small apartment into my house. At the post-wedding reception, we opened our gifts. At the bottom of the pile was a single yellowed envelope. Inside was an old, heart-shaped valentine with the original signature erased. On the valentine were written the words, "I received this valentine from the only man I've ever loved on our first Valentine's Day. I kept it safe all these years. It feels right to pass it on to you now, as a symbol of my heart moving from me to you. May your life be filled with love and care for one another. May you never break each other's hearts or let pride come between you. Congratulations. Wishing you both a lifetime of happiness. With all my love, Victoria."
Oh no, I need to call the police. What were they thinking? I got attacked by a woman around 35 years old wearing a hat and dark glasses. Can you guess her age? That's the best description I could manage. I'm having a hard time understanding this. Let me start from the beginning. Maybe it will make more sense. I'm hoping that by writing everything down, I can figure something out. The shock of being attacked without reason in public is so different from anything I've experienced before. I just can't wrap my head around it. Just a few hours ago, life was great. I had a wonderful life, a beautiful home, money in the bank, and a husband who adored me. But that's not why I was so happy leaving the office on Monday. It was for a more private reason. My husband was away on business, and I had plans with my lover John when I got home. John is a recent addition to my life, and he's taken me to new places in bed. That's why I was walking to my car with a smile on my face. As I approached, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Hoping it was John, I turned around, only to be met with a fist to my face from an angry woman. I barely had time to see her face before falling to the ground, letting her kick me in the back without a word. Eventually, she left, and fearing she might return, I called for help. The ambulance took me to the hospital. I arrived before the night rush, so I passed out a bit and was quickly attended to. Besides a split lip and some bruises, I was okay. They warned me about delayed concussion symptoms and told me to ice the bruises before sending me home. The police questioned me, but with a vague description of a slender blonde woman in a hat and dark glasses, catching her seemed unlikely. I couldn't even tell if she was a natural blonde or give a reason for the attack. I asked the police for a ride back to my car, but they said it was against the rules. I tried to put on a smile, but my lip hurt too much. Attempting to call John for a ride failed, so I had to call a taxi. My new plan for the evening was painkillers, maybe vodka, ice for the bruises, and a long bath until it was time to call my husband. He always knew how to help me make sense of things and make me laugh when I was sad. I wouldn't be surprised if he dropped everything and drove 4 hours home after hearing what happened. I guess I was always his priority. I had only been home for about half an hour. The bathtub was full and the ice was cooling my martini when there was a knock on the door. Thinking it was the Chinese takeout I ordered, I opened the door. The next thing I knew, I had vague memories, and as I tried to sit up, my head hurt terribly. Something had dried on my face. Scratching a bit, I found blood under my fingernail. Panic set in as I felt my entire face gently. Thankfully, my nose wasn't broken, but my cheek was, and I had a black eye. Turning my head slowly, I saw dried blood spatters on the floor. Continuing my inspection, I found a lump on the back of my head and a bruise, likely from hitting the floor. Despite the pain, I straightened up. Hallucinations and flashes of images played in my mind. I distinctly saw a stocky woman with long black hair and almost bushy eyebrows, her face hidden by a scarf. That's all I saw, except for a wooden handle or bat flying toward my eyes. I woke up embarrassed, still on the couch. The clock showed 5 a.m., and I had a terrible headache. Every movement felt like a bowling ball hitting the walls inside my skull. As I staggered into the kitchen, I felt pain in my groin. The attacker must have kicked me there. I swallowed 2 painkillers and staggered to the bathroom. The mirror revealed an unpleasant sight. Whatever they slapped me with, my nose was okay, but my cheek was broken, and I had a black eye. Who are these people? This woman and the one from this afternoon. What's going on? I didn't think I had any enemies, even though I'm a real estate agent. I wondered if I should call more than one ambulance, but decided against it. Yesterday afternoon, the doctor advised me to watch for delayed concussion for 8 hours. It's been longer since I got drubbed the second time. I also thought about calling the police, but chose not to. Our front door wasn't visible from the hotel grounds, and I had less information to provide than last time. One woman accidentally attacking me is one thing, but 2 is just weird. Despite the late hour, I decided to call Dave. He would know what to do. Oh no, Dave. What did he think when he tried to call me last night? Like he always did and I didn't answer? He would try calling my cell phone and home phone and then ask where I was. I hope this didn't make him think I was sneaking out of the house when he wasn't here. I've always been incredibly careful in my dealings. Wouldn't it be ironic if a false tip gave me away? Taking my mobile phone, I checked how many missed calls there were from my husband. Strange, but there were none. I picked up my home phone and dialed the number to get a list of my latest actions. The last unanswered call was made 3 days ago. What the? I couldn't remember the last time Dave didn't talk to me when he was gone. In fact, it was part of my safety net that I would routinely call him on his hotel phone, citing the supposed dangers of using a cell phone too much before going to meet my lover at a motel or on very rare occasions, inviting him out here. This reminded me that I had called John on my cell phone the previous afternoon and had not yet deleted the recording. I wasn't stupid enough to store his number in my phone, and without a trace, there was no evidence. There were several photos on it that should never have seen the light of day, but my phone was the only place they were kept, and they were hidden there. I also made sure it wasn't locked with a regular password or one of those boilerplate items. Just my fingerprint and a huge, strong password. Dave thinks it's a work requirement not to share my password. On the rare occasions when he needed to use my phone, I opened it for him and never let him out of my sight. I decided it was safer to store the photos on my phone that I can protect than any other media that could be discovered. I deleted the call to John, left a message in his message bank, and noted that he also did not answer my previous call. I'm surprised Dave didn't call. Despite the early hour, I called him. I really needed to hear his comforting voice. The call went straight to the message bank, which was weird. Maybe he lost his charger and his battery died or something. This wasn't the first time. By this time, it was already after 5 in the morning, and I had a show. There was no way I could show up looking like I did now, so I put on more makeup than usual to cover it up. After all, I had a whole arsenal. I should probably explain this. You see, all through high school, I was very ordinary. You've all met those who watched from the sidelines as all the boys worth their salt ignored them to go after the athletic, popular, bright girls. Although I was proud that I was not like some other plain ones, they exposed themselves to everyone, mistakenly believing that being popular meant they had succeeded. Thus, I haven't any relationship when I left school at 16. My parents were not overly ambitious towards me, and were happy to support me as I attended a series of evening courses to gain some administrative qualification while I worked as a waitress. In my spare time, I lost my purity to someone who, I realized too late, was a smart carnivore. I realized this when, the next morning, after a quick, not convenient closeness in his hotel room, he asked me to leave. I chalked it up to experience and thought that this episode had made me an expert at choosing carnivores. That did not happen. My next 2 closeness encounters ended just as disastrously. The one after them was a guy with less experience than me. Here, I already left him after the first night. This is how I sailed through life until I was 20. That's when Dave came into my life. Dave was a year ahead of me in school and seemed to be my male equivalent. He was tall and thin, but nothing else about him was striking. We got to talking at the restaurant where I worked, where he invited several clients to lunch. After the first meeting, I learned enough to understand that he was a man with a clear career plan and determination to get things done. I accepted the date, and the rest, as they say, is history. I hooked up with him about 2 weeks after meeting, and it was clear we were both new to this, making it awkward. We were both open to learning and used each other for that. If I had to describe my life a year before he turned 21, I'd say it was good. I had a boyfriend who was growing and clearly loved me. We weren't invited to fancy events, but we didn't mind. We moved into an apartment, and I was taking a real estate course paid for by Dave when my crucial birthday came. Dave celebrated his first big bonus by treating me. I got my own car, a voucher for 2 days with a beauty consultant, and a bigger engagement ring than I expected. I said yes, drove the car, and delayed using the voucher. Oh, I wish I could tear up that voucher. Then I could have a husband with his phone on and a face without bruises. Dave reminded me about the voucher, but I was busy planning a simple wedding. We didn't have many friends. In the end, I decided to use it for a little treat for myself before the big day. That's when I found out it was for 2 days with Caroline, an elegant woman in her 30s. I don't know what qualities she had, but she knew how to showcase femininity. Our first stop was a hairdresser, where I had a major makeover. I have to admit I was nervous about how it would turn out. The rest of that first day was spent shopping. Caroline took me to upscale stores, and later that evening, she used my phone to ask Dave to update my credit card. At the end of the day, looking in the mirror at my new hairstyle and clothes, I almost called Caroline to tell her not to worry. The next day, the hairstyle and clothes truly made me beautiful. The following day, at the salon, I got pampered with a pedicure, manicure, facial, and scalp massage. Then I met Colin, who claimed to be more fun than a tree full of monkeys and, if you believe him, used to be a beautician for some famous stars. He and Caroline transformed my face over the next 2 hours, including some corrections. I wasn't allowed to look until they said I was perfect. When I saw my reflection, I involuntarily took a step back. That's when Caroline's true genius emerged. The clothes and hairstyle that seemed out of place before now framed a face that I had to admit was beautiful. I couldn't believe it. The change was stunning. Caroline made me look up from admiring myself for Colin's 2-hour lecture on how he uncovered the natural masterpiece that was me. I thanked him and Caroline for this life-changing experience. If I had known how it would actually affect me, I might have been shocked. Dave did a funny double take when I got home, but quickly recovered, telling me it just showed me as he always saw me. That night was the wildest in bed, and 3 days later, we were married. The honeymoon was confusing for men, and handsome guys who never paid me attention were now vying to dance with me. I supported them when Dave didn't mind. He was the first to admit that dancing wasn't his favorite. Despite all the attention, it still didn't hit me that the game had changed. This realization started when the wedding photo album arrived. I saw that I was absolutely stunning, and for the first time, I felt that I had married a man a bit shorter than me, noticeable in various settings. I probably feel this way deep down, even today, which is neither logical nor fair. What have I achieved in the 5 years since my marriage compared to Dave? He built his business and was on his way to becoming a millionaire. I used my looks to sell real estate. Despite the unequal success, for some reason, I felt superior. 5 years later, after revealing my true self, I became popular, praised, entitled, and within 6 months, an unfaithful wife. In my defense, resisting temptation was extremely difficult. Suddenly my mind, which believed my body was a 5 out of 10, was pursued by men who were 9 out of 10. It took waking up with a third such man for me to realize they were just more attractive versions of the carnivore who took my honor. From that point on, I had complete control in choosing my partners. Now, with my bruised face, I decided to put on a good layer of concealer and foundation. Feeling sorry for myself, I attempted to call Dave every 15 minutes, but had no luck. It took an hour and a half of layering until I managed to hide everything to my satisfaction. Unfortunately, I had no success in communicating with my husband or explaining the strange behavior of the two women. To ease my loneliness, I made coffee and drank it, feeling more alone than I had in years. Making friends with women was always a challenge for me, and with Dave's unresponsiveness, I found myself isolated in my darkest hour. With an hour to spare, I texted John to call me when he could, then occupied myself with meaningless content in my inbox until it was time to leave for the office. Carrying the laptop bag and luxury briefcase Dave bought me last year to my car in the detached garage, I placed them in the back seat. Slamming the door, I turned to the driver's door and unexpectedly, she was standing right in front of me as I turned away from the back door of my car. I can only assume she must have been hiding behind the garage wall or somewhere else when I re-entered. The incident happened so quickly that it was hard to recall when it ended. I remember falling to the ground, feeling someone's foot step on my hands, which I instinctively raised to protect my face. The blows eventually stopped, and I ran towards the house. The brutality of the attack was utterly shocking, and my face was burning. Leaning against the door briefly, I stumbled towards the downstairs bathroom. The mirror revealed 3 long scratches on my left cheek and 2 on my right, apparently caused by raking fingernails. My right arm and forearm hurt, but fortunately nothing was broken. I called the police again, then Dave and John while I waited for the cops to arrive. No one answered. I felt so alone. The office called just after 9, questioning why I had abandoned the client. They only calmed down a bit when I explained the attack while working for a real estate company. The police were of little help, and it seemed like media stink thought I was wasting their time with vague descriptions. They interviewed neighbors and asked if I needed an ambulance. I didn't. I needed my husband to answer my call. In complete confusion, I closed the door behind the cops, walked into the living room, and yelled at the photo on the mantel where Dave and I were standing. "Next time, you'll take your phone charger, Dave, even if I have to pack it for you myself." An attack by one random woman wasn't unusual, and 2 was statistically unlikely, but 3 was almost impossible. So it was time for me to carefully consider the possible reasons why I had so many enemies. Unfortunately, I couldn't think of anything. This time, makeup couldn't conceal the scratches. To worsen matters, I had to remove earlier applied creams with makeup remover pads to apply a little disinfectant to my new scratches. It's unknown what kind of microbes this psychopath had under her nails. The scratches burned intensely, and the disinfectant felt like I had poured gasoline on my skin. The task was made even more difficult by the fact that my right arm was starting to feel raw and bruised. By the end, my face was red and blotchy, and the last attacker must have been wearing heels or something, as bruises appeared on my arms and forearms in distinct forms. I called Dave again, eager to hear his voice, but the call went to voicemail once more. Frustrated, I considered sending him an email, hoping he'd hurry home when he reads it. The issue was my laptop in the car. Walking down the stairs awkwardly like a 90-year-old, I couldn't ignore the noticeable bruises on my lower back, legs, and groin. Trying to turn the bolt on the front door, fear held me back. I scolded myself for cowardice. Remembering real estate seminars, I gave myself a pep talk. The motivation behind the beatings was a mystery, but after the 3 women took out their anger on me, it seemed like a case of mistaken identity. That's what I thought. Now thinking logically, I considered viewing the garage from the back door to surprise and ambush someone. Walking from room to room, checking windows, the route to the garage, I realized there were blind spots. The secluded backyard left me vulnerable without witnesses. My phone rang. Dave. Finally, I rushed towards it, ignoring the protest of my bruised and battered limbs. I was disappointed. It wasn't Dave. It was my office arranging a meeting with a client at a hotel in 30 minutes. Excuses about being injured fell on deaf ears. They were working lean, and if I couldn't handle it, they made it clear they could find a replacement. The challenge remained, getting to my car safely. A light bulb went on. I'd call a taxi. I did just that, giving very specific instructions about parking in the middle of the driveway where I could see everything from the house. After all, there could be someone hiding behind the garage or behind the hedge on the property line. But of course, with the taxi driver as a witness, I would be safe. While waiting for the taxi, I did everything I could for my face. 10 minutes later, the taxi horn prompted me to make one last visual check outside, and then an awkward dash to the safety of the taxi. I didn't really relax until we were a block away from home. The driver was a woman, which worried me, but after she asked where I was going, she lost interest in me. 15 minutes later, Nearing our destination, I realized that I had eaten my fill. The house keys were in my briefcase in the backseat of my car, parked in the garage. Ordering the taxi back would make me at least 25 minutes late for the meeting, and the client might well be very indignant at being set up a second time and demand my head from the agency. I decided to somehow get through the scheduled meeting. I could show the client the exterior and report some bureaucratic mistakes with the keys. I'll almost certainly miss the sale, but hopefully I won't get fired. I called Dave again before reaching home, waiting half an hour for the client, who arrived by taxi. She was a tall, dark-haired woman around 30, quite pretty except for the eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Carrying a trendy, huge bag, she looked at a paper, then walked towards me, swallowing my excuse for the key fiasco, but looked irritated when I explained that the best thing I could suggest was to walk outside looking in the windows. Luckily, I knew everything about the property by heart, so I didn't have to refer to any notes also left in the briefcase. I knew in my heart that if this house didn't sell quickly, the owners might lower the price enough for Dave and me to buy it. It was a beautiful green area, populated by young urban professionals. Dave and I would fit in perfectly here. We walked out into the backyard, where I pointed out a spacious art studio located separate from the main house. After I finished listing its features, I walked over to the master bedroom window and peered through the gap in the curtains to see how good the view was. I heard an inappropriate sound behind me. Looking back, I would describe it as a clicking sound. I turned and noticed the client holding a telescopic baton, one of those self-defense tools often advertised in women's magazines. Her cute expression turned into one of distorted hatred. I believe she hissed bad word before swinging the baton forcefully at my head. The blow hit my hastily raised forearms, causing excruciating pain, and I actually heard a bone crack. I think the woman, in her furious state, heard it too. Her anger seemed to fade as she stood there watching me scream, lowering my hand as the pain overwhelmed me. However, some residual anger remained, and she struck the side of my head. I absorbed most of the blow with my undamaged hand, but it still knocked me to the ground. When I came to, the wild woman was gone, leaving me completely alone. Even though she disappeared, something fell from her purse when she pulled out the baton, a piece of paper that I saw her stuff into her bag. When I examined it, I found a photograph, about a 5 size, lying face up on the ground. It was a familiar image, one of my favorites. I was perplexed about how this crazy woman got a copy. It was a selfie I took about 3 months ago, capturing in closeness moment with John. My phone was in my outstretched hand when I took the photo. Despite everything, I had the strength at that moment to press the button, and the excellent framing was purely luck. Recalling the crummy motel room we paid cash for, John and I, eager after weeks without closeness, engaged in dirty and rough closeness. Despite the roughness, I experienced incredible previously unknown pleasure. This photograph became the means by which the woman identified me, leading me to guess she might be Mrs. John, judging by her anger. I never inquired about John's wife, just as we never discussed Dave. I didn't consider it important enough to think about. Before holding my damaged hand, I rolled into a sitting position. I didn't debate internally about calling an ambulance. This time I did so. However, no police involvement to avoid exposing my affairs, which could lead to Dave finding out and result in something terrible. The question of how John's baton-wielding wife got her hands on this photo occupied my mind as I staggered to meet the ambulance. I had never shared this photo with anyone or any other device, not even with John. Was my phone hacked? At the hospital, it was the same triage nurse, ready to call the police. I talked her out of it, convincing her it was an accident. Despite her disbelief, she respected my wishes after I vigorously shook my head when she inquired about my husband. They set my arm, administered strong painkillers, and then ushered me into a taxi. The considerate taxi driver took me straight to my front door, waiting until I entered, locked the door from inside. Against the doctor's recommendations, I washed down the painkillers with a large, very large shot of vodka while simultaneously concocting a story to tell my husband. I left him numerous confused and worried messages that he'll discover when he charges his phone. My attempt to call him again failed, so I remembered my idea to send him an email. Since my laptop was in the car and it was already dark, I wasn't going to take any more chances with another potential attack. Then I recalled our old desktop computer, which we used before getting laptops, and Dave continued to use. I turned it on and went to pour myself some vodka. When I returned, there was a small spinning hourglass on the screen, and under it, the word sync. What's syncing? I responded to the call of nature, which took a while. Ever tried unzipping your pants side zipper with one arm in a sling? When I returned to the office, the computer had finished syncing. What it was syncing with and displaying on the screen was terrible. Well, that clarifies everything. Everything. Who were these awful women and why did they do what they did? Oddly, this knowledge provided some comfort. After the complete confusion of the past 24 hours, what the screensaver showed on our old home computer explained much more. It became clear why, for the first time in forever, my husband didn't call me during his business trip, why he didn't answer the calls, why he might never call me again, how I was considered an arrogant person and probably lost the rest of my life. I barely made it to the bathroom when I painfully vomited. Touching the tender left side of my face, I felt the purple bruise and scratches on the right before leaving the bathroom to turn off the monitor displaying disgusting, destructive photos on the screensaver of a computer I hardly ever used. It displayed the contents of my phone, more precisely, the photographs on it. They flashed on the computer screen, changing approximately every 10 seconds. Strangely enough, photographs of houses or specific interior elements were interspersed with much more graphic photographs. I recalled how a couple of weeks ago, my boss hired a tech company to update our phones. I watched like a hawk while the technician played with mine. Now it was obvious that at least one of these changes resulted in the photos I had so carefully hidden on it being transferred to my desktop along with the rest of my photo folder. And if they could see the desktop of the old computer, could they? Oh no. Dave's laptop was much more modern than the old home computer. A feeling of dread came over me as I imagined Dave looking at the 100 or so trophy photographs. Photographs meant only for my personal pleasure. Photos of me and different men in different poses. Can I imagine David capturing photographs of my lovers' faces and printing them, taking them to my work, and comparing the faces to the names in their files with the help of our secretary, who always had a soft spot for him? Unfortunately, yes, I can. Names led to addresses and wives. Wives who saw these photographs. Wives who, in my case, provided the blows, scrapes, and bruises. After yet another unanswered call to my husband's phone, I struggled upstairs and checked his wardrobe. But what I saw only made my depression worse. Then, ignoring the terrible photos on the old computer screensaver, I turned on the monitor again and logged into our bank's online website and saw a few tiny numbers where there should have been big ones. I dropped my chin to my chest. The realization of what a spoiled, conniving, entitled person I had become shocked me. The blow was as painful as all my physical injuries combined. Working with both commercial and domestic properties, there was never a shortage of male clients to choose from, and I made a choice. Perhaps in the early days, I tried to be very careful with my lovers. Back then, I had a strict rule: no photos, videos, or any traces. Oh, I did make a few mistakes along the way. I was almost exposed by one guy who wanted to continue the relationship after it had run its course. In my opinion, it was then that I decided to limit myself to married men who had as much to lose as I did. But I calmed down and relaxed some of my rules when it became obvious that Dave trusted me. Implicit error. Big mistake. Huge. I should have stuck to the no photos rule. I kicked myself for my absolute arrogance, wondering how I could let this happen. I became the popular girl I dreamed of being in school, and somehow had to back up that popularity by sleeping with all the hot men. My mistake was thinking that my marriage could withstand the truth about its real nature. I'm not naive enough to believe that Dave would never discover my affairs, but I had a plan ready for that scenario. One I was confident Dave would accept. I figured he wouldn't easily find a replacement on my level, and ultimately, he'd forgive me. My plan hinged on him learning about just one lover. I'd admit my weakness, claim he was a skilled seducer, shed some tears, promise it wouldn't happen again, and then ask him to let me share everything I've kept hidden. As I reflected, I wondered if this was merely a self-preservation tactic, a way to postpone the inevitable realization that Dave had no intention of forgiving me. He didn't catch me in bed with someone else, triggering my rehearsed response. How could I have predicted he'd discover me in cyberspace with dozens of lovers at the same time?
I'm 43, and my wife, aged 40, and I've been married for 16 years. We have a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. Our marriage had a challenging start, but we got through those tough years and emerged stronger. We married young, lacking some maturity, but our love helped us conquer any challenges. I'm not entirely sure if this was wishful thinking. My wife has been a manager at a large advertising company for 3 years, and I've been an engineer for 7 years. Both our jobs pay well, providing a comfortable lifestyle for our family. We are a close-knit family, always making time for our kids to create cherished memories. Despite being a good dad and husband, I was shocked to discover my wife's long-term affair, despite some mistakes I made. Now, on to the discovery. My wife became distant, especially in the last 2 challenging years. She constantly compared me to her boss, who seemed to handle things better. I couldn't read her mind, unlike her boss. I didn't take the initiative to plan dates and make her feel special, something her boss did for his wife. I asked her what she wanted to spice up our love life, but her response was vague. I needed to already know and do it. Feeling clueless, I researched and bought books, but my attempts were met with disappointment. Unbeknownst to me, it wasn't me who was fixing things all along. We were close to her boss and his family, spending time together at barbecues, family outings, and other activities. I confided in her boss about our marital problems, thinking he was a good person. Back to the discovery, I grew emotionally tired from my wife's demands to improve our marriage. One night, she laughed and giggled while texting someone, and when I tried to peek, she angrily pulled away. Suspecting an affair, I made the mistake of asking her directly the next day, but she vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Unable to access her phone initially, I later obtained it and discovered deleted texts. Although some conversations seemed inconsistent, I gathered bits and pieces of proof, confirming the affair with her boss. Instead of confronting her immediately, I waited, feeling devastated and concerned about the kids. Despite the pain, I didn't want to give up on the marriage. So, 3 days later, I purchased How to Help Your Spouse Heal from an Affair with the hope of saving our relationship. Planning to talk on a Saturday, she claimed an emergency at work, which seemed suspicious. Unable to confirm, she returned home late on Sunday, avoiding questions about her delay. I suffered, but she seemed indifferent. Desperate for stability, I contacted her boss's wife, who was as shocked as me. We decided to gather evidence on each side and compare. I snooped on my wife, and she did the same with her husband, easily finding undeniable proof. Her husband's arrogance left the texts on his phone intact, making sense of the little texts I found earlier. We discovered the affair had been ongoing for 2 years, and both of us were furious. Although revenge was tempting, we decided against it. They had slept together in various places, even exchanging pictures. Ignoring the images to avoid scarring ourselves, we sought revenge without engaging in our own affairs. We both drew up divorce papers around the same time, determined to move on from the betrayal. Our spouses were unaware that we knew, so we played our roles. When everything was set, they resumed their affair. This time, we collaborated with the boss's wife, knowing exactly where and how to confront them, even the hotel they booked for their weekend getaway. I personally went there with the sheriff, waiting in the lobby while my wife was called down from a room, dressed in a bathrobe. Despite the distance from our home, it wasn't too far. The sheriff asked for her confirmation, and she was served after confusedly affirming her name. It was satisfying to see the shock on her face, but I walked away without rubbing it in. She grabbed my arm, demanding to know the meaning. I told her about the affair and I'm leaving. Simple. She screamed, pulled my arm, and the sheriff had to intervene, telling her to release me. She started crying, but I left quickly to get home. My wife informed her boss, and he panicked, being served at home. We didn't give them time to recover. We blindsided them, just like they did to us. My divorce will be finalized in a couple of months, while hers might take a bit longer. Both my wife and her boss are fighting the divorces, neither wanting to end their marriages. The excuses I hear are that they never intended to leave their spouses. It was a purely clean affair, nothing more. People have worse affairs and still come out with a great marriage. They messed up and would like a chance to fix the situation. I asked my wife about the outcome, and she said she was going with the flow, acting completely out of character. I called her an idiot. People around me criticize me for not giving my wife another chance. My kids know what's going on, age appropriate, and they support me, but wish we could stay together. My resolve is slipping, especially since we still live in the same house, and my wife is going to therapy and reading the book I brought. She says she's remorseful and will do whatever it takes. All I tell her is that she's sorry she got caught, and that's all I need to know. She called me a bitter, resentful person who can't look past all the negativity. She apologized later, but I know that's how she feels. The boss's wife and I still talk, which my wife hates. She thinks I might have a revenge affair, or her boss's wife is the reason I won't give us another chance. She has asked me repeatedly to initiate no contact with her boss's wife, just like she did with her boss. I told her she's crazy, we didn't do anything wrong, and why should I respect her opinions now? See, I think I'm done. I have no respect for her. She still doesn't want to give up, and is actively trying to engage with me about her thoughts and processes to her affair. I see them as excuses, so I don't entertain her. She wants me to do therapy with her. I've read many places where the therapist blames the sufferer, so I said hell no. She wants me to read infidelity books with her. What's the point if we're going to divorce anyway? She wants to be with me. I told her she's not going to manipulate me with closeness. She says it's not manipulation, just showing how much she loves me. I corrected and said love me now. People around me, even my mom, are frustrated, saying people make mistakes, and my wife realizes through her mistakes that she truly does love me. I tell them I won't be anyone's fallback plan. I feel bad for treating her the way I do, but I still love her even though there's hate. Am I being unnecessarily cruel to her? She's trying hard, but I just don't care. Should I reconsider the divorce? People are saying I'm moving too quickly and might regret it. Is that true? I don't know what's real. Update. Thanks for your concern, guys. My wife and I are in a sort of good place, but we're not reconciling. I'm still divorcing her because her affair was too long for me to get over. If it had been a one-night stand, that would be a different story. But no, 2 years is just a slap in the face. I've gone to a few therapy sessions with her because I'm not a monster and still love her. One session was very good and made me understand her remorse. She hasn't handled the fallout perfectly, but she's been trying pretty damn hard. The second session was a mess of her being upset with me for continuously contacting the boss's wife and her being afraid of a revenge affair. It was the angriest I ever was through this whole mess, and we argued a great deal later because I refused to do what she wanted, which is no contact with the boss's wife. That was resolved when I promised her that there will be no revenge affair. I know I don't owe her anything, but she's still my wife until our divorce, and I still want to hold true to my commitments. I've attended more sessions with her to check on her progress. Yes, this therapist handles both individual and marriage counseling. No, I'm not attending these sessions because I secretly want to save our marriage. I just want to witness my wife's progress and be involved if needed. After the divorce, I'll step away gracefully. The boss's wife is still leaving her husband, and he's still resisting the divorce. She's as determined as I am, and I'll admit we confide in each other during low days. I still don't see any affair. We're just on friendly terms. She's a strong, independent woman who doesn't tolerate nonsense. My kids are doing well. They understand that divorcing doesn't mean we love them any less. They don't want a divorce, but they understand why it's necessary for us in an age-appropriate way. My wife no longer works at the advertising company. She resigned after I served her. She's strictly no contact with her former boss. According to her, she sought help on forums to save the marriage. I've been reading a lot here, and initially, I didn't get why people stayed with adulterers, but after seeing my wife work hard to be a better person, I can see the temptation. She's not a monster, she's just flawed and made horrible choices, learning to be better. She's offered everything for another chance, but I'm not sure. As the divorce nears, I feel more at peace. We recently discussed her asking for a chance after the divorce. She's offered a postnup. I wasn't completely opposed, but it would be a very, very long road for her. To be honest, a huge part of me wants this divorce for a fleeting sense of justice, the only justice I can get without becoming an adulterer. My mom and I reconciled after I revealed more about my wife's affair, but now she's furious after learning the details. Navigating her anger is challenging. Regarding a revenge affair, I didn't want to write here until my divorce was finalized, but I'm just angry today and need to vent. As many of you know, my wife is scared crazy about a revenge affair. The simple reason is because I'm still in contact and see the other woman she betrayed. My wife is very insecure compared to the other betrayed spouse. Is that how it's spelled? The other betrayed spouse is younger, a model, very attractive, and owns a successful business. It makes my wife paranoid that I will give in to temptation and cheat on her as revenge. I still can't believe the nerve of her to give me the two wrongs don't make a right speech. Of course, she isn't wrong, and I don't intend to ever follow through, but her hypocrisy infuriates me. Every time I visit the other betrayed spouse, my wife gets extremely sad or clingy. I don't know how many times she has thrown herself at me just to make sure I don't cheat on her back. I reject her attempts, and it only makes things worse. It absolutely floors me that cheaters are this selfish, only thinking about themselves and their pain, while the betrayed have to trudge along and try to pick up the pieces. Another thing, our kids still see their kids. I never go to the other betrayed spouse without my kids. But no, my wife still thinks I have it in me to be as heartless as she was and take any opportunity to be with another woman. Laughable. Ohm is still living in their holiday home, begging the other betrayed spouse to take him back. I won't lie, it brings me a sense of great satisfaction to see him suffer the consequences. He hasn't tried to threaten me because of how much leverage I have on him. He is allowed to visit his kids anytime he wants but doesn't want to see me, so he makes sure I'm not around and then visits. I pity the guy, honestly. Currently, my wife has been extremely apologetic. She's been showing me a lot of affection, but I've been ignoring it because I'm not in a good place. We have a therapy session today, and I plan to express all the pain and hurt I've endured because of her. The rage I feel is becoming overwhelming. Update. During a recent therapy session with my wife, she asked for more time to win me back. She had several reasons why I should at least try to participate in recovering our marriage, not necessarily reconciling. I kept pointing out that she's only trying now because of the fallout from her affair. If she was still with the other person, she wouldn't be making an effort. She emotionally mistreated me for months, and I won't let myself be walked all over, even by the woman I loved. She acknowledged her wrongdoings and apologized again, making many promises to make it up to me. She wants our marriage to become stronger than ever and believes it's possible. I asked if she was willing to deal with my rage because I have a lot of it. She said absolutely, encouraging me to unload on her whenever I needed to process the pain. Usually, when I ask her why she had an affair, I get a million excuses. This time, she was straightforward, admitting there was no excuse for what she did. She vowed to show through her actions every day for the rest of her life that she's truly remorseful and would never hurt me that way again. She opened up about her feelings, revealing she was very insecure and jealous of the other betrayed spouse. The affair boosted her ego, making her feel beautiful and desired. She admitted it was a fantasy that would never last, regretting it deeply. She acknowledged the guilt she'd carry for the rest of her life and said she'd probably never forgive herself. She confessed she could never compare to the other betrayed spouse, and her certainty that I would cheat back stemmed from the other person's beauty and integrity. The other betrayed spouse never said a mean thing or threatened her. It was all my wife's insecurities talking. The therapist asked what it would take for me to consider my wife's proposal. I couldn't think of anything and honestly said I needed a time machine because what I have now is a sham of a marriage. I never signed up for this. The therapist suggested that all marriages face problems and how they're dealt with shows the strength of a marriage. I was taken aback and told the therapist to focus on my wife, not us. The therapist suggested my unwillingness to listen to logical reasoning might be a communication problem. I didn't disagree. On the drive home, my wife and I had a long talk. She asked if I felt emasculated due to her affair, surprising me with the question. I answered yes. She then shocked me by asking if I would feel better if I slept with another woman. I reiterated that I'm not normal and wouldn't have a revenge affair. She clarified she meant a trial separation where I could go out and regain my confidence. She'd remain faithful and wait for me to come back when I'm ready. I thought her proposal was crazy, asking how it would benefit the marriage for both of us to have affairs. She argued that mine wouldn't be an affair because we'd be separated with conditions allowing me to see other people. I rejected the idea, finding it out of character for her to propose that. Despite not trusting her, she has been surprisingly calm and patient these few weeks, almost like a different person from the insecure one. Even though she doesn't want it, she has been generous in the divorce, making the situation difficult to navigate. Update. Before I dive into it, I want to thank those who've been supporting me. Right now, my wife and I decided to be civil and spend the holidays together for our kids. This will be our last holiday, though my wife hopes otherwise. I'm doing it for our kids because I love them. Our divorce will be final in mid-February. For those curious, we've split everything 50-50. Though my wife has been generous, I'm unsure if it's a tactic for later nastiness. So far, she's been nice, confessing it's because I've been a great husband and father, so I should get a fair divorce. She won't lose much in the divorce, but I'll get slightly more, thanks to her. I stopped therapy with her. It gave false hope. She admits a desire for closeness due to my absence, understanding I felt emasculated due to her affair. She's been frequently trying to engage me in closeness, which is new since my wife hardly initiated closeness before. Over time, I appreciated her addressing my hang-up, but I reject her attempts. She insists it's not about reconciliation. She just wants me to feel good and desired. I've cut off contact with the other betrayed spouse temporarily due to things getting too personal. The other betrayed spouse confessed interest, willing to wait until my divorce is finalized before anything. I'm confused and unsure about returning her feelings, so we decided to take a break until everything is sorted out. Despite someone suggesting my presence affects her reconciliation, I have nothing to do with her decision to leave Ohm. She's done with him, and we don't talk badly about our spouses when together. Ohm recently apologized in person, but I didn't accept it. Call me petty, but I don't care about what he's going through. I have a question. Is it okay to have closeness with my wife, even if we're not reconciling? I miss the closeness, and my wife is eager, trying everything possible to initiate it. Sometimes I find it hard to resist. She even got rid of anything related to Ohm without me asking, as I didn't care to know where they had closeness. It's not easy for me to switch off these feelings. Is this a trap? Am I being played? Before someone suggests kicking her out, I've tried that, but I want her here for less hassle until the divorce is done. Rant. It's finally dawned on me. I thought I wasted years on a seemingly worthless woman, but she gave me great kids and memories. I won't forget that, but I now understand I can do better than her. I've received advice and finally understand I deserve better. She treated me poorly when another man showed her attention, investing her energy in him. Only now, when I'm over her, does she try everything to keep me and invest in us. Now she wants me to be happy, even being adventurous in bed. While our previous closeness wasn't perfect, I liked it. I realize I've missed out on a lot through her texts with Ohm, knowing just the tip of the iceberg and how graphic their encounters were. Now she values my boundaries, sees me as the king she should have before, but it feels fleeting. She's transparent and brutally honest, expressing regret for the affair. I see her constant look of shame and hopelessness when I'm unreceptive, making me hate myself sometimes, but it's necessary. Why can't I see this as a positive thing? Why can't I judge her for her remorseful actions? Many people have long-term affairs and come out stronger, right? Why am I basing decisions on emotion and not mature objectivity? Someone else might get the improved version of her while I navigate another uncertain relationship. Why not fight for this when everything seems to point to something good in the future? I've been given these lines and have one answer. I won't accept disrespect. Maybe I was willing to in the early stages, but I woke up from that quickly. This is for the people who pumped me and regularly asked about my situation. I'm going to enjoy this Christmas with my entire family and then move on from my wife. I decided to stop listening to the nonsense I created in my head to keep my wife's control over me and move on entirely from the idea of her. I won't be dating her or giving us another chance. We are over for good. I like to say my wife isn't a villain, and that's true. I want her to be happy, but it will never be with me. She has shown me that. I called the other betrayed spouse today and offered her dinner after the holidays for her support when I hit rock bottom. She said she would love to. I know this doesn't happen often, but we really supported each other throughout all of this, and I owe her thanks. Before people start talking about how much I planned this with the other betrayed spouse, I honestly did not. My emotions have been so screwed up these few years that the very thought of another woman never crossed my mind, and it's dinner, nothing else, unless we both want it. But the closer divorce gets, the more I realize I actually have options. And one option has been right there. What about Ohm? I don't give a flying FK about the dude. I do not think I will marry again, and I will tell this to any woman. Although my divorce hasn't been much of a hassle, I am losing a lot of money. Still, the whole idea of marriage just seems like a sham to me now. Sorry for being so cynical right now. I don't want this post to offend anyone, but I'm still jaded. I gave my best years to this woman, and I'm starting to realize how little I got back. Update. Officially divorced. It's been a long time coming. It's over. My ex and I have officially separated for good. It happened almost 3 weeks ago, and for a few days after, I grieved like I lost a loved one. It hit me extremely hard that my marriage failed so spectacularly. I never cried that hard, ever since I discovered the affair in the first place. I raged a lot too, definitely one of my lowest points. Everything has been organized for my ex, partially for the kids' sake. She moved out of the house and I'm looking to buy her out of her part of it. She lives in an apartment now, a big downgrade for her which depresses her. She is still going to therapy, still invested in reading and studying infidelity. I don't know exactly why. We've had long talks leading to and after the divorce, minimal physical contact. I know I shouldn't entertain her now, but she's still the mother of my kids, and I want us to be good co-parents. I'm nothing if not logical about the situation, largely thanks to this community and others. Of course, it's the same tune. She wants to reconcile, and I think it's too risky for me to put myself in that situation again. Unfortunately, I'm not in the mood to give her that gift. This past weekend, I accompanied the other betrayed spouse to dinner with no intention other than enjoying each other's company and chatting. We talked about all sorts of things. Things got flirty between us, and I must admit, I was very reluctant to entertain the rapidly changing mood. Well, I guess I should say the night ended in a very passionate way. Sorry for TMI. It was probably the most perfect closeness I've ever had. OBS is very much a giver and spades above my ex. I did not intend for it to go that far, but the other betrayed spouse and I were willing, and I was as well. I learned quite a few more tricks in the sack. It's the first time I ever had someone that enthusiastic to please me, and not the other way around. Guess I shouldn't call her the other betrayed spouse anymore, as she divorced her ex. But for privacy's sake, I'll just use that. I do not think we will take our relationship further. To be honest, I think the hormones and wine got the best of us that night. She would like to, but I am undecided. I need to sort myself out emotionally, and I think she does as well. I feel very good, though. People might not like hearing this, but the closeness I had with the other betrayed spouse really helped a lot with my residual self-esteem issues. I felt desired, alive, and finally understood what I was missing out on. I will never settle for robotic closeness again. What was more satisfying was knowing that I was not cheating and did not lower my morals. All things considered, I'm very proud of how I handled all this crap. I wasn't perfect, but did the best I could. I'm probably coming out very lucky compared to many BHS, even if I did lose a substantial amount of money in this process. But it was because I was willing to absorb advice and listen to people with experience instead of going in blind and hoping for the best. Takeaways. Respect yourself. Never tolerate disrespect, even from those closest to you. Everyone deserves a healthy and fulfilling relationship. Don't settle for less from your partner. A committed relationship should have a satisfying closeness life. If your partner isn't putting in effort, especially if they did so before or during an affair, don't accept it. Express your dissatisfaction. If your partner doesn't meet your needs, don't settle for unexciting closeness unless you both agree. It's okay to walk away. Communicate, communicate, communicate. It's incredibly important. If you're betrayed, only you can truly heal yourself. It took me a long time to grasp this. There are more points, but that's all I can think of now. I'll answer comments for a few hours, but after that, I'm done posting here and moving on with my life. Have a good one, everyone. Update. I intentionally avoided anything related to infidelity because I still get triggered now and then. I'm dealing with the trauma and trying to move on without dwelling too much on it. I'm okay. No accidents or disappearing acts. I'm still an IC other betrayed spouse with my girlfriend. She resolved her case with Ohm regarding child custody and finances maturely instead of seeking revenge. There's some tension among the children, and we've started therapy to help them adjust and understand that our relationship doesn't diminish their importance. It's challenging because not everyone is on board. My daughter X and Ohm don't like being around each other, and there's tension. My ex wants a second chance, probably upset that the other betrayed spouse is influencing my perspective. I'm genuinely concerned about her behavior. She tried something at a 4th of July party, and though I stopped it, she's persisting. People warned me she might pine for me, and they were right. The other betrayed spouse is letting me handle it, but is also growing weary of my ex. Did I mention my ex strongly dislikes the other betrayed spouse? I thought my ex was changing for the better, but since I left her, she's been a train wreck. It's puzzling. I treated her well and she treated me poorly. But the moment I said, "Forget you," she's desperate for my attention. I don't know if I should be angry about it. Well, there you have it. Y'all can rest easy now. I'm concerned about my daughter. Hello, everyone. I've been searching for helpful resources to navigate my current situation. Check my history for more details, but I'll provide a summary. My ex-wife had a 2-year affair, during which she was emotionally abusive and frequently compared me to her affair partner, Ohm. Our closeness suffered, and initially, I blamed myself. When I discovered the affair, I eventually decided to divorce her, especially after a weekend when she lied about spending time with Ohm. I connected with the other betrayed spouse, and together we initiated divorces while ensuring our children were informed in an age-appropriate manner. We've been open with the kids, explaining the separation without details. Despite their understandable reluctance, they handled it as well as could be expected. My ex-wife pushed for reconciliation, but I chose to end the relationship, forgiving her but moving forward. The divorce was financially costly, but not excessively damaging. Soon after the divorce, the other betrayed spouse and I developed a serious relationship, having initially been friends with benefits. Supporting each other post-affair fallout was crucial, and without it, I might have remained with my cheating ex or worse. I regularly talk to my kids, ensuring open communication. My son, aged 10, likes the other betrayed spouse, while my 15-year-old daughter is taking more time to adjust. She wants me to be happy, but is cautious about interfering in my relationship. We've discussed healthy relationships and her concerns, and she seems supportive, although she needs time. Our relationship is discreet to avoid overwhelming all the kids, including her 2 daughters. Everyone, including Ohm, is in therapy. Now, concerning my daughter, the fallout from the affair strained her relationship with her mother. She openly expresses hatred because she believes none of this would have happened if not for her mother's actions. She acts rebelliously toward her mother, rejecting affection and even cursing at her. I've stepped in to enforce respect, but it worries me. The ex-wife is trying to mend their relationship, seeking my assistance despite it being my decision to divorce. I could throw her infidelity in her face, but I choose not to. However, it raises doubts about how I handled the situation. Things I'm worried about. Daughter lacks respect for her mother. Daughter wishes for things to go back to before. She's unaware of her mother's misuse toward me. Daughter is in therapy, but I'm unsure of its effectiveness. Concerns that she feels voiceless and overwhelmed. Handling my relationship well, but possibly hiding emotions. Fear of having negatively impacted my kids' lives by divorcing their mother. Any advice is highly appreciated. Update. I want to share a realistic update, not a fairy tale. Let's address the big question. How are the other betrayed spouse and I doing? Honestly, we're doing fantastic. If I had known a woman like her existed earlier, I would have found her years ago. Jokes aside, our relationship is the strongest I've ever had. Because my ex-wife put me through so much, I didn't really know what a healthy relationship looked like. I still doubted myself, but the other betrayed spouse has been an amazing partner, helping me through this. I'm genuinely in love with her. She consistently shows me how much I mean to her, and I feel the same way. However, we're keeping it at the girlfriend level. and I'm still unsure about the whole idea of marriage. We're keeping our relationship private and involving the children as little as possible, although they know we're dating. Now, about the kids, it was a bit rough at first. Who am I kidding? But they're getting along really well now. Our heavy involvement in their lives and ensuring they had someone to talk to when they had problems helped. Also, there's been a lot of therapy. My daughter and son adore the other betrayed spouse. She has a great connection with kids, and her children like me much more than they did almost 2 years ago. Her youngest even started telling people that I'm her stepdad at functions and outings I took her to, which was a surprise. I was concerned she might feel pressured to see me that way, but she assured me she liked me a lot, and I make her mom happy, so she's happy. I'm her stepdad. Hearing that hit me emotionally, though I put up a strong front. I enjoy seeing my kids happily playing with the others, even though they've formed a united front to playfully tease my son, the only boy and the youngest of the bunch. I'm not sure if I should laugh or cringe at that one. So, how about my cheating ex-wife? We are on good terms. She's been working hard to repair her relationship with our daughter, and I was pleased when my daughter said she could find it in her heart to forgive her mother for what she did. They've been through a lot and have made progress together. Despite that, I don't think my ex-wife has fully accepted that we're done as a couple. She seems to be looking for or hinting at a second try. She's been hitting the gym and attending individual therapy. Overall, she seems much healthier now, but I don't really care. I've made peace with the past, and it's her problem for not doing the same. She talks more with the other betrayed spouse, and that's reciprocated. However, the other betrayed spouse regards her with skepticism, which is understandable given everything that's happened. Ohm is a lost cause. I didn't realize what a mess the guy would be despite all his money. He has a girlfriend now, but his kids despise her and are very open about it. It took me some time to see how full of himself the dude was. To be honest, I don't like his girlfriend either. She comes off as extremely materialistic, selfish, and callous toward the girls. In conclusion, we're doing better than okay. Don't get me wrong, I had doubts about whether this was the right path, but with a lot of effort from everyone involved, it's turning out splendidly. No happily ever after, just genuinely happy now.